yourself on mute. We are recording this, but we are doing, we will have this be audio only to protect anonymity. Okay, so before we start, you can unmute and we will say the ACA Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, the courage to change the one I can, and the wisdom to know that one is me. You're welcome for being here. Alrighty. And I have asked someone to read the steps, which is on page 586 of the Big Red Book.
Hey, was that me, Catherine?
Yes, and I will do
steps of the tradition.
after.
Okay, beautiful. Okay, so step 1. We admitted we were powerless over the effects of alcoholism or other family dysfunction, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand God. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly asked God to remove our shortcomings. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understand God, praying only for knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry that out. And 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to others who still suffer and to practice these principles in all our affairs.
Thank you so much. And I will briefly go back and tell you the itinerary of the day. First, we're going to read the steps, then the traditions. 2:45, we'll have our first speaker, Stephanie B., and a 15-minute Q&A. We will have our 5-minute break. Then we will have our second set of speakers, Barbara B. and Tom G., and another 15 minutes of Q&A. We'll have another 5-minute break. And we'll have our last speakers, Beth D. and Bob K., and another Q&A for closing with our loving parent meditation. And I have asked someone to read the 12 traditions.
My name is Tammy. I'm an adult child in recovery, and these are the 12 traditions of ACA. 1, our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends on ACA unity. 2, for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority. A loving God is expressed in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern. 3, the only requirement for ACA is a desire to recover from the effects of growing up in an alcoholic or otherwise dysfunctional family. 4, each group is autonomous except in matters affecting other groups or ACA as a whole. We cooperate with all other 12-step programs. 5, each group has but one primary purpose, to carry its message to the adult child who still suffers. 6, an AA group ought never endorse, finance, or lend the ACA name to any related facility or outside enterprise, lest problems of money, property, and prestige divert us from our primary purpose. 7, every ACA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. 8, adult children of alcoholics should remain forever non-professional, but our service centers may employ special workers. 9, ACA as such ought never be organized, but we may create service boards or committees directly responsible to those they serve. 10, adult children of alcoholics has no opinion on outside issues. Hence, the ACA name ought never be drawn into public controversy. 11, our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, TV, and films. And 12, anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities.
Thank you, Tammy. And we just wanted to have a few announcements. So one of them is we're just encouraging you, feel free to use the chat to reach out to our IT technical support. And those people would be identified, primarily Steve, but to reach out if you were having trouble accessing this. Also, use chat to share information between each other. You are welcome to do that as well. All righty then, we have those announcements. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Stephanie B. Stephanie B began her personal recovery in 1971 and has been engaged in deep personal exploration and growth ever since. She started her professional career in 1971, which was and still is a catalyst for her growth and for carrying a message of a developmental process of addiction recovery. Fortunate and deeply grateful to be active in addiction recovery and to write and teach about a long-term process of change, began her focus on ACAs in 1974 with her master's thesis on the teenage daughters of male alcoholics. Stephanie often draws on her lay and professional recoveries to speak about her own journey of more than half a century of recovery. Take it away, Stephanie.
Whoa, thank you so much, Catherine. Thank you, ACA. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, everybody. I'm trying to cover my bases here. It is such an honor to be here. I thank you all. It's also been a discovery journey. This last week has been an exercise in putting things on paper and then being surprised. What is this? I'm saying to myself. And so I worked very hard this week on me. And I hope that that's a bottom line statement. The work doesn't stop. If I can stay open to myself, open to see where I've been, what's there, then hopefully I will be able to have, an challenging experience like this week, but one that has given me great gifts, more knowledge. I'll talk about some of that today. A couple of caveats first, before the caveats. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, the steering committee. And thank you all ACAs, those of you who are here, those of you whom I may have met over the years, those of you I haven't. I am so grateful. Now the caveat is I'm going to be reading a great deal here so that I can capture what I have written this week. This is all relatively new for me to be in this framework, relatively new, it's brand new. And so my recovery isn't new. A lot of knowledge isn't new, but the process of growth keeps going. So I'm going to be reading and I'm going to be looking at you. I can't see you, but I am very much in touch with you and the troubles with reading a talk, but that's what I'm going to do so I can capture as much as possible. And I will welcome your questions as they come. Feel free later about me personally, which I know this is. I have the privilege of speaking about myself as an ACA in recovery, which I am, and my relationship with myself. That's where I had great feats of new awareness and insight. I've had the knowledge always with that voice inside. It's not that I didn't know it, but I never felt that I could speak it out as I'm going to do today. I never felt I was permitted to do so by who grants permission, wherever that may be. Keep it separate. Keep a professional hat separate. And I've done that for 50 years. And today, what was coming in talking with Bob and others was to put it together. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do. And that's why I'm reading it too. To talk about my relationship with myself over time could be a challenging task, and it has been. But a dear friend of mine for many years in Palo Alto once said, "I'm not much, but I'm all I think about." And that would always bring, as I see some of your smiles and laughs, just bring it down. It's so true. So there's material from me today. Let me start with a few words about the personal ACA bio. A week ago, I was talking with this steering committee, and I said, "Wait, what's a personal ACA bio?" Yep, I haven't had one. And so I crafted it very quickly, surprisingly to me. And you heard what was in there. I learned juxtaposing my ACA self, that identity, that story, that experience of mine with my life experience was a new idea. And in the process of figuring that out, the words professional recovery came out and were on the paper. This is real paper and pen. And I thought, what's that? So I've really had quite a week as I've looked at what a professional recovery means. I'm going to talk more about that later. I hadn't approached it in this way. My ACA story and my recoveries, they belong together. And so here we go. I will speak about the journey of my personal recovery, right along with what I have called this professional recovery. Hopefully, we'll see what these things mean for me. My relationship to myself over a long period of time, long years, really is a process of integration. I'm an alcoholic. That came first. That recovery came first. And I'm an alcoholic by virtue of 2 alcoholic parents. What an impact on me and my recovery 2 alcoholic parents has been. I was born and raised in the family of alcohol. And fortunately, I was able to find my recovery. That is my primary identity, my recovery. And ACA is my primary identity too. So I have several. And a professional identity also has existed for me for all of these years. And I'm going to trace that with you as we go through. That more than half a century that I wrote, who would write that? I did. That came out. And I had to ask Bob, is that just a little bit too much there? And he thought it was just fine. So that half a century, I had, I'd known my parents were alcoholics my whole life, but I had not put words or voice to that truth within my family because it wasn't allowed. That wasn't allowed. The denial, the sense you mustn't say what it is. I could not tell anybody. I couldn't say it out loud growing up. Both parents severely alcoholic. You get a picture of what that was like. What organized my entire developmental experience, my childhood, my family relationships, the organizer of that could not be named. And so what does a child do with that? You grow up with that as the organizer. And there were not too many pockets within my childhood experience that weren't pretty well saturated with my parents' alcohol, their drinking, and the life that organized as well. Entering therapy in 1970 after a nervous breakdown, which is what it was called back then. The words that popped out that day were, why are you here? My parents are alcoholics, and I think I might be an alcoholic. This breakdown, and later my own alcoholic recovery, opened the door to name my parents' alcoholism much more openly, to be able to begin to recognize, tell the truth. All that couldn't be known, all that couldn't be stated growing up, I could now begin to know and to state. I defined myself as an ACA in the early 70s, right away on that day. My parents are alcoholic. Research on the children of alcoholics already existed, but not the concept of adult children quite yet. And as you see today, you're going to hear some of my thinking and my theories as well. And we'll see how smooth this process of integrating, and stepping back to be the observer, the distance, to be able to talk about what it was like without being immersed in it. And that professional identity was life-saving for me, for the teaching of boundaries, for helping me in a family that had none, for helping me to know when and where to be able to find restraint, as well as to be able to speak. Who I am involves my identity and my identification as a woman in recovery. My identity, I hope, has not changed since a fateful day in 1971 when I recognized that I was destroying myself, that I was the one who was responsible for my drinking, nobody else. And that moment of truth came, and I knew I was an alcoholic. The identity alcoholic has informed me for all of these years. And the ACA came along as well, very early in the 1970s for me. These became the anchors and the new organizers of my, what I would call the developmental process of recovery, that I was building theories, asking questions about, a developmental process of growth that occurs slowly over time in recovery. These two identities were going to shape a new view of me and a reconstruction of me. The story, the telling the truth. I would discover and begin to tell that story from the point of view of becoming abstinent. And then each step by step, in sync with entry to graduate school and active in a program of recovery, side by side, and psychotherapy as well. What I actually came to see so clearly this week as I was writing and thinking about the synchronicity of these events was that it was given to me. Alcoholism was recognized. I could listen to others and hear, and I could begin to ask questions about that. But ACA was not a known entity in 1971 for me to listen and take in and understand. And so what happened was I began to read and study and meet others who became one of the initial groups founding ACA. So I was the professional at that point, as I was also beginning to see myself as an ACA. Psychotherapy, I will tell you, was enormously helpful there to separate out these pieces for me, and for me to be able to start speaking, to say out loud what I had lived and knew. Alcohol alcoholism, the loss of control of the people in my family and my life, they were the central organizing principles, as I called it, of my development, of my identity, who I am, who I was. And at some point, as many ACAs I've encountered have noted, there's a tremendous underlying fear that I carried of being out of control. I will be out of control. I carried so much shame about the way my parents looked, about who they were, and what was going on in the family with chronic severe alcoholism. The shame, I was shame avoidant. I was terrified growing up. And of course, I was to become out of control as a way of finding recovery, for sure. What I call myself, an alcoholic, an ACA, for myself, reflects and will become the way I reconstruct my life and the way I define recovery, what that means for me. Now, many people in many programs talk about recovery, that word, the definition of it, and as a restoration. I was good at one point and then I wasn't, and I want to restore the person that I was. Well, you can tell already there was no restoration for me. I could not go back. I couldn't go back myself, and I couldn't go back home to restore relationships in a family that remained so distressed, so out of control. So that was a time of grief and loss, and recovery came to mean for me starting over. Starting over. Recovery means new growth, a new self, and thus a new relationship with myself. And that's what these years have involved. I couldn't go back home, though I maintained relationships, though I lost my father very early on in my own recovery. There's a lot to cope with, but I understood this was going to be new for me. It may be new for you. What I say about me is my story, and restoration is not what I was seeking. I'm just checking here with these papers, hoping that I'm connecting. I feel like I am. My process with myself, my recovery, my new growth continues to be fluid. I said that my identity holds, and I hope that it does, because it's the core of me, and it's the core that will guide my definitions of who I am, my work in recovery, along with program elements, the steps, all of the other pieces that I have used. But that identity is tremendously important. Key, however, one point I can say now that has been key to my development in my recoveries is based on a growing capacity, the word capacity, to be honest. And that is you'll recognize it from how it works. To feel, to see, and know what is real, and to find a voice to say and live these truths. That's a summary statement about me. Growing capacity to be honest. I didn't start out at the end of honesty. I didn't start out being honest now. I could take in this much at a time, just this much, or at a time, and I could face myself to become honest. and to grow a capacity within me. And I think that is just so foundational and core for people in recovery. I want to know what's real and to find a voice to say and to live the truths that I am allowing in, that I am discovering. I want to read to you an introduction to a conference I gave a year ago or so. I'm going to read this one word for word. You can see me slipping around here trying to navigate the written word, but this one I'm going to read because it was telling. It highlights a reckoning that I think exists for people, for families, but a reckoning with denial, personal, relational, and on a national scale in this case, that focused acutely on what label do we call this? Now, you all, I bet you every one of you has had experience with that. Who am I? What do I call myself? Is there an O in that, in those letters? You know, what does it mean? And I had somebody recently say to me, I said, oh, I work with ACA. And they said, ACA, is that the Affordable Care Act? And I thought, there's a lot of possibilities for this here. Adult child was such a revolutionary concept because it linked the individual to a relation, to someone else. And that has not changed since then. And if for those of you who do know mental health, who know diagnosis and things like that, you will know that trauma, a diagnosis of trauma does the same thing. It links people together. And that was perfect for the family of alcoholism to understand. It is not an individual alone. We understand it is, but we're going to understand this person, this family by the experiences. So this was at a conference I gave for ACA. 40 years ago, this is me starting and saying my thank yous as I did here. And I started 40 years ago, almost coming up, 1983. 40 years ago, a group of clinicians met together to name the realities and the traumas of parental drinking. We gathered to give voice and shape to the validity of the generational impact of growing up with parental alcoholism. In our small founding group as alcoholism and addiction specialists, educators and therapists, we called it parental alcoholism, and we didn't think twice about that. That's what it was. All of us had lived with parental drinking. Some of us could name it. Growing up, most of us living with parental drinking and alcoholism were not permitted to name anything. We might have called it the situation. We might have had lots of euphemisms to describe repeated rituals that we grew to know. For many of us, our parents didn't name it either. Nobody did. We were told to call it something else. We learned to call it by another name, or we denied we needed a name for anything. So there you have the origins of denial, deep denial, that have really only recently changed. And in the United States and certainly in other countries, as we see here, there's a longer history now when we can name it. And then we can begin to understand a relationship with ourselves that's going to be based on reality. It's going to be based on the truth now. It's going to be based on what I'm going to call it. And what I have found over these years is that not everybody can call it alcoholism yet. And around the world, we find other names for this matter of parental drinking. The label ACA became important for people who read an article about Claudia Black, whom you may all know of and know. It was an article about us and me. She was in Southern California working with children, young children of alcoholics in the mid-70s, and I was in Northern California working with adult children of alcoholics before our organizations were born. But we had started to be able to call it ACA, which is what we did. Group therapy was an important piece of this, and a little bit later I'll share some of those elements from the group work. Now, as I said, I was learning along with people we would call clients, patients. This was official therapy, and we learned a lot. You better believe I learned a lot about me. And after this article made this announcement in Newsweek magazine in May 1979, it was on a page called Lifestyle, and it reported on what the two of us were doing, working with people who had grown up with alcoholism, with parental alcoholism. It was an announcement. And as we began to offer groups, I'm speaking of psychiatrist Tim Cermak, some of you may know him and his work. He and I were working together at Stanford. And as we began to offer groups, we had waiting lists of hundreds of people. And many of them said they were carrying this Newsweek tattered article saying, "It's the permission. We can say it. It's the permission. I need to talk about what happened to me. I need to talk about my life. I need to be able to name the alcoholism." So we learned right away the label is so central to the kind of relationship an individual can have, I could have with myself. And when I landed from a nervous breakdown, anxiety, massive panic, everything in the books, because I was bursting at the seams. I could not have a life. I could not talk about a reality of my life until I could speak about my alcoholism and the alcoholism of my parents. I cannot emphasize that enough about my story, my relationship. I had to be able to call it and then start talking with, in a way then that my life, as I'm doing this today, my life was to align the realities of what happened, to be able to remember, to open up, to create a story that aligned with what I was calling it and what I was calling myself. And that's what recovery is so much about. Denial is a primitive defense, and it's powerful. Denial says that what you know deeply, and I did. I was born to be the golden girl of my family. They waited for me. We've heard about being waited for. They waited for me, and I was the golden girl, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful for that, and it also was much more than I could ever achieve to save my family, and as other ACAs may acknowledge as well, to save the world. My sense of myself was to be able to help people, certainly in my family, the pain that was evident every day, my parents' pain. I wanted to help soothe that. I wanted to fix things, as well as being caught up in the violence, the defense of my mother, the fears of what would happen. So I had a lot to carry as a panic, hypervigilance, the sense in me that something terrible was going to happen. And though I was supposed to be the one who would be able to fix it, I had not one way, not one means of changing anybody or fixing anything. So I grew up to feel very helpless and powerless about this role that I was gifted with. Denial says that what you know isn't so. What you know, you're not permitted to know. You may not say it out loud. You may not align this knowledge with your self-knowledge. In varying degrees, denial requires massive defense to keep the truth buried, or at least undercover. What follows is often an arrest in development. How are you going to grow around such a thing? Many ACAs can. One parent is alcoholic. What's the other one? What about other family? Who's there? And these are the aspects of the research that I wanted to know. What happens with two alcoholic parents? It depends. For me, I was very, very much on the extreme of severity. And I believe that is, in a sense, is what got me into my own recoveries. There wasn't room to move anymore. It was so severe. There weren't any other models. If you knew my dad and you came to our house, you had a drink. And we were the neighborhood bar. We weren't bar, he wasn't a bartender, but people knew where alcohol was. And there weren't any boundaries. People came walking in, you know, Ben, I want a drink. Let's have a drink. Open up the bar. And that thus would flow the alcohol. Okay. In thinking about yourself, I hope that you would think, who was there? What was it like? Who was there? Who was drinking? What was somebody else doing? These are questions for your relationship with yourself. How do I come to be who I am? How can I be true to myself? And there are lots of wonderful books and workbooks and guidelines about thinking about what happened. The arrest in development and whatever personal identity can be created must be, with denial running the show, it must be, the personal identity must be distorted and defended. So what we saw and what I know has been true for me, I'd like to say was true, you know, as that started to come out, has been true for me, was that I carried, when I was growing up and when I was drinking and living out my own alcoholism, I had a defensive self. I was trying to have an image of being in control. Fortunately, I was a good student and there was a value of education in the family. Oh my goodness. Life-saving. It gives distance. You can step back from something. And, but I had a defensive self. I defended my family. I remember I had images of myself as a child, 8 years old. And that's a time when kids' thinking changes from a lot of magical thinking, concrete thinking, to much more reality-based thinking, to getting ready for puberty and growing up. I had images of myself as a ragged person living in this family. My father came from the Ozarks, and you can tell I loved my family and I hated them with a vengeance as well. So much shame to grow up with. How do I explain? But I had these images of myself growing up, and with my patent leather shoes and my crinoline petticoats, I was, a vision of the good girl. I wanted to be that too, but I couldn't save anybody. And therein came my anger and my rage, that they wouldn't listen to me. With a defensive self, you must hide from yourself. Can't see, can't feel. What you know, you cannot know. I say this 2 or 3 times throughout here. You can't have feelings about a reality that is not supposed to exist. Whoa. If you are silenced, where do the feelings go? They're going to go, or they'll be in a ball within to come out some other way. Turning to drugs, they come out in physical pain. These feelings that can't be articulated to be what they belong to, they'll come out in a tremendous amount of psychosomatic symptoms, nightmares, the traumas and the signs of trauma. They'll also come out in relationships, anger, rage, all kinds of displacements for what I cannot know yet that they really are about. The labels alcoholic and ACA get us ready to know reality. Oh, do they? Like the people that we got to work with who carry that page from the magazine. I need this. I need this. I need to be able to talk. They get us ready to know reality, the truth, and to begin to put pieces together. That will be a lifelong journey, and it's going to be my story. It's my story, and it really isn't anybody else's story. My brother, who's also in recovery, has a different story. We defended in the ways we could, in the ways to survive. We'll begin to craft a story, what happened, or rather, first of all, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. Along with the label, which will shape my own story. My work of a lifetime, there's another key theme, will be making real the past, making it real, bringing it to life. And that's, of course, traumatic, the experience of it. We now have a word called trigger, but I need to value knowing, seeing, feeling what was real, and so that I can know and feel and see what's real today, not only with my relationship with me, which I will feel freer as I'm able to see and know, but also in any other relationship I may make. And here's where I say, as we get ourselves ready to make it real, we also will get ready to develop that capacity to be honest, and an increasing, growing capacity to be honest. And again, this last week, as I was working away here to know these pieces and pull them together, my capacity to be honest expanded. It was, and the emotions come. Now that I can speak about the togetherness of my ACA, the professional informed, my professional explorations and research came back to me about myself. I hope that was clear. I needed to ask the questions. I needed to be able to say, what is the process of recovery? What is my recovery going to look like? This was when I entered my own recovery for alcoholism. I was young, and I knew, as I said, my very first time I spoke, I said, my name is Stephanie, I'm an alcoholic, and I was born and raised in a family of alcohol. And so they go together. And my work is also to separate myself from being in that past reality. Let me look. I see. I want to ask Catherine. Am I to finish at 3:30?
I think we started earlier, so you should be done around 3:23.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to pause a second here to just look because I want to proceed. To include some other pieces. You have heard me talk about key themes in relating to myself, the awareness, the stepping back, being able to become an observer of myself, an observer participant of myself, to know what's real, to be able to tolerate what's real. I want to talk about some of the key defenses in that defensive self that we were working with people early on to tease out, and they all belonged to me. So as I was becoming a professional in grad school, I was also asking these questions that I needed to know. And those defenses rose as we started our first group. Within 6 months, we had so much data, and it was denial. Group members are talking about denial. Are you in denial? Are you in denial? Am I in denial? The family was in denial. It was just, and what does it look like? Because we can't see it. Denial, control. I know we all hear about control. Are you controlling me? Am I controlling you? Who's in control? I need to be in charge to feel safe. Responsibility, and it's not a kind of adult responsibility born of internal growth to be able to be a responsible adult. It's not that kind of responsibility. It's the kind I was talking about. Feeling that I was responsible for the world, and definitely for whether my family members lived or died. This was rugged, that kind of responsibility. Hypervigilance will come along. Here's something I really want to talk about in recovery. The last defense, that operation, was what I then called dichotomous thinking, and I now call it binary thinking. That's the current word. All or none. Perception, vision, all or none thinking I see as a core for our alcoholism, for ACAs, but also for our nation. We like to be certain about things so that we can continue to see ourselves as able to know whatever we think we should know. Now I'm extending here, and I do, because I think society is out of control, and society has become a trigger for many, many people. It certainly has for me, as I stand at the TV and I watch, and I'm standing there and I'm crying, and I'm back home in early life. I'm saying, could someone please say what's real? Could somebody please stand up for what is true? And I see that loss of control is not limited to an individual, a couple, a family. Loss of control can occur all around us, and that also can be trauma. The trauma that will come to us. It comes through, it breaks through the barriers. So today what I will deal with often is traumas seeping in still from the past. Part of my relationship with myself in recovery, ACA recovery, is to be able to begin to say, wait, these feelings, this wake up sense you have, this darkness, where are you? What's happening? And that's separating myself. That's saying, oh, wait, you're in a reenactment. I just hear my voice come out with a friend. What was that? My inner voice says. Growing that voice, growing that capacity to be honest, to be able to learn to pull myself out of living in my present world from the soul and the center of my childhood and my past. That is absolutely central, and it's challenging. It is often a source of the problems an individual has, as well as in a couple relationship. Who's home here? Who's talking? And as I can become better able to recognize in myself, oh, I'm shaking, I'm scared. I'm having a traumatic reaction to what, where, how do I understand what this is?
Timer announcement.
What's that?
3
Oh.
minutes, please.
3 minutes, please. I'm going to go back and pick up a story that I want to say. And this is a story of me. There are times in our lives, I talked about denial. When can we see? When can we know? When I was in college, I was a senior in college, and I was a severe alcoholic. And hiding so I would not feel shame, so that I would not look like these people. And I was able to be a good student. Thank heaven, the gift. And I studied and I studied and I wrote. I was awakened in the night, blindfold put on, and I was walked to a closet where I was given the honor of being invited to join a women's drinking club. I knew about this club, and the words that were channeled through me in that moment, in that darkness, in the middle of the night, were not mine. I hadn't thought about this, but I said, thank you for the honor of this invitation, but I cannot accept it because I'm going to go to graduate school, I hope. And I cannot be drinking for most of my time and study in the way I need to if I'm going to go to college. They accepted that. I had not ever thought about graduate school, but you will see then the power of this last week for me. I'm going to have some tears probably here. Hold on. The power to see education, to have a voice for me that was more acceptable, allowable as somebody who's asking the questions or the researcher in many ways, because in the early 70s and the 80s, I was often alone with the knowledge, with the ACA, and with the impact of trauma on myself. Being able to follow education, to go to school, to learn, and then to be able to take back that learning, to be able to take it in myself and to share it, as some of you know that I have done over all these years. What a gift. Now, this is the first time I've ever talked about this. Again, because it has always been important to keep it separate, and it is. I want to be able to be that observer, the awareness. I want to be able, as I catch myself in a moment, that way I can hear it. And to be able to catch that and step back and pause and think about my relationship, not just my relationship, but think, where am I? Who's speaking? The voice that couldn't speak for so long and so many years, now has the freedom. I am responsible. I want to be responsible. I want agency. I want to be the one who takes that responsibility for myself. Now, I imagine I'm pretty close there, am I, Catherine? I want to see if I can find a statement really quickly, and I don't know if I can, but I don't think I can find it. I will look. I am grateful. I am grateful that this has been my path. I'm quite aware of one thing. It comes later in the talk I didn't get to yet, but it's about spirituality, which is it's clearly the core. It's the core. It is in my own deepest self, my heart. It is my attachment and my ability to form an attachment to my recovery, the very first time when I said, I'm an alcoholic. And I knew what that meant. I had lost control, and I would stop drinking, which I did. But then I needed to look for the guidance and the models ahead and form attachments. And that's what this process of recovery is about. The spiritual attachment is the core, the foundation of my recovery. And that's a good place for me to stop and say, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And we wanted to segue. We're segueing into our question and answer, but we did want you to go into a little bit of your ACA program at the moment and how you are dealing with relationships, how those have changed, and et cetera, et cetera.
Wow. You know, it's interesting, even the words ACA program, because you can hear the program is in me. It's in my skin and in my, and I'm ACA, gratefully. My ACA program is to do a lot of what I said in the end part there about trauma. And I'm an adult child of an alcoholic. My child of alcoholic was where so much of my own trauma came from, with me trying so hard to save people. Adult child, I am now, and as I said, trying to have that separation. My program is what I really was saying, is to appreciate when early families coming in again. My adult child is when the kinds of characteristics and trauma, the hypervigilance, the fears, the panics that I still carry, when they don't match other people's reality. And people, we've learned to know, my granddaughters call me Nervous Nellie, because I still am worried. I will fret, and they'll use the words like this, and I'm paying attention, and I work to try and pull myself away from so much worry in me, perhaps. And that's a regression. That's going back. The worry, it may match a present reality, but it may not. But I try not to become too controlling or dominant. That I know is really key. My ACA program is to try to live among others who were not ACAs, who didn't have the terrors and the panic that I had. They know and understand me, but I don't want to dominate. I've worked hard my entire 51 years to try not to dominate relationships where alcoholism does not exist. And I created a life in my sobriety where there is no active alcoholism. So I'm the recovering person. And there's many, many challenges for me to be quiet, to maybe shake inside a bit, to worry, but to put the duct tape on. So and this is in the current day, having grown daughter, 3 granddaughters, and again, not wanting to infuse into that relationship the same fears, the irrational fears, and they weren't irrational when I was growing up. So I would say that's such a core about my ACA program, to be able to see, to be able to know, to call something what it is. And I will make a point of doing that. And I will also create a world around me of colleagues, friends, professional, personal, all around me, where I will be able to tolerate being with these people, with this person, being with friends, so that I will not be upset, pulled back into other people's drinking or drugs. So that's really, I think that's a responsibility of mine. People go along with me to be in the world, but to create a world that I can appreciate and value, that I'm not being quiet because everyone else has a different reality.
Thank you so much. We have the next question. For those of us who shut down as a result of learned helplessness and struggle with having a sense of personal agency, what advice would you offer?
Wait, I have to, for those of us who struggle with learned helplessness.
Yes, this is a question someone
Right,
asked.
I know, I got it. It was fast when you said it.
Oh, sorry.
What
I speak
advice would
fast. For
what
those of
advice-
us yes, who shut down as a result of learned helplessness and
Yeah.
struggle with having a sense of personal agency.
Got it.
What advice would you-
Beautiful. And it's beautifully stated. And what I think is the shutdown part. See if you can talk to yourself to open up, to put the key, and the key, what do we call it? What do I call it? Just the pieces that I was laying out here in the steps to be able to become real, to be able to let go of the defenses. And learned helplessness is I mean, it's its own entity, and it also will come to serve as a defense. I can't do that. I'm going to stay away. Or in the ways that you can begin to see, all of this is slow, this process of growth. It's slow, and so much of help that's available today is fast. We're going to just take care of this problem. We're going to have an outcome, and on we go. And that is not what I see change is about. And so the agency, small steps, awareness. Now, these are abstractions, but as you begin to move from being shut down, it sounded like that might be a place to start. What would be a first step when you would say, wow, I opened up? I felt scared and helpless, but I did something different. Small steps and chunks. See how it feels, talking to others about that. Agency will come as we own responsibility. And being the child of, there's often a sense of the fear and the panic may remain, as well as a sense of needing to get the story first, to be able to get the feelings out of what happened. What was I responsible for and what wasn't I? So it's a big piece of coming together to know first what that person said, just a little bit of chunks. See what you think would be a step toward agency for you, small. And I say, please make it small, because we overwhelm ourselves with grand moves. We have to often, it's time to go back to hiding with a grand move.
Thank you for that. Lisa, did you still want me to ask that one question? Okay, I'm going to go ahead. In early recovery, how do you distinguish between regression and when you are actually being manipulated?
Wow. Now, I'm gonna terrific. And sometimes you can't. And and regression would be, I'm seeing if I have this right. The regression in early recovery is going back to old self, is having a reenactment poke through. It comes through and you're in that old self, and versus being manipulated by someone else, or being, where's the manipulation? How do I understand that versus regression?
There wasn't really anything more specific than that.
See, I'm not sure what the person who wrote the question meant there. So I'm hesitant to try to guess. Let me see if this will help. Early on, a process of recovery, or I would hear, if you're not moving forward, if you're not working on something in recovery, if you're not moving forward, then you're moving backwards. Well, there you are, the binary. And that used to make me mad. I would just say, wait, we want to reach for, we want to strive for and grow into a capacity for complexity as well. that I'll have a regression and I want to check in with myself as quickly as I can see it. If I mean, I'm capable of manipulating or, myself, distortion, all those things will come back to be part of my experience. I would like to be able to learn to catch them sooner. And I would like to be able to love and hate the same person at the same time. That's a statement about complexity. And I've done that and I do that. And I think complexity is very, very positive. If I'm going to be an all or none person in recovery, I'm going to be so limited because I'm either going to be failing or, I'm going to be the victim or the aggressor. I'm going to be the dominant one over everyone or the submissive. All of these binary categories are troublesome. I need to learn to be able to grow into complexity. Now, again, that didn't answer that question about manipulated, and I don't know how to do that without more information.
So this person did clarify they meant manipulation by someone else.
By someone else.
Mhm.
Now, I'm not sure how that person sees the comparison there. How do I know if I'm in a regression, which is me going back, or if I'm being manipulated by someone else? Does that person mean to go into a state with that other person, that someone else would like me to join in a regression or a certain way of acting and relating to one another that would cause me to go backward? That would be one way someone might consider that. Otherwise, I'm again not certain, and therefore don't want to, other than guessing as I'm doing. And that person has an idea about what that is. I'm thinking too, maybe it would be, could be understood too. Somebody's feeling manipulated or in a role, or something's demanded here that I don't want to do. It makes me defensive again. I want to speak the truth without hurting, or however that is. And I don't want to do it, but I'm afraid to say I don't want to do it at this moment in time because someone else wants me to. Now that's a clear, I want to please people. I still want to please people. I want to please people. So that could be a possible way of thinking about that question. And you won't always, you're not going to know. This journey of recovery, is detective work within myself via various means, talking with people, recovery work, therapy, all of the above. And so I'm not going to know necessarily. What I want to do when I'm in any kind of questionable place, what I want to do is pause. See if I can wait to act. Pause and let more information in is a terrific part of growth. And even in relationship, if you don't know if you're in a regression yourself, or if you're being manipulated to go there, pause. Just take a time out.
Thank you. So we wanted to know, there was a question. What is an example of how ACA has changed your relationships? So.
Wow. And that
Okay.
coming from me. And you're talking about your relationships, or as a whole, the knowledge base of ACA has changed relationships. And
has changed your relationships as you
mine.
have done the steps and the traditions and worked your program, et cetera.
Okay. So how has it changed my relationships? That's a lot easier. I know more about an answer to that than I do about the world, but I hope I can have time to add another piece about the power of ACA and its survival as a label and a knowledge base. For me, ACA is, as I said, it's in my, it's in my soul. It's in my bones, my soul. It's who I am, a part of me. In my relationships, and this is, but my alcohol recovery as well, with the steps, my responsibility is me. So in any relationship, I want to check in. Where am I? Where am I? It's changed it to be in every possible way to take responsibility. And oh, wow, to be able to claim responsibility very quickly. I grow in the ability to see, oh, whoa, I just bungled that one. Can we rewind to what I just said? I just want to see if that was hurtful or, something like that. I'm able to be in the now so much more. 50 years, some of you might be saying, hope so. Well, it's slow work sometimes. And, but I feel so much freer. I feel a coherence within me now. As I said, I can see, I can know, and I can make choices about what I say or don't say. I definitely am somebody now who wants to claim my responsibility for something, usually something that it needs an apology. Sometimes I want to claim responsibility for something great. Why aren't you all noticing? But that's less than wanting to be right there in the moment as soon as possible. That's really key for me, I think. And then I'm freer to be in the present, engaging back and forth, much more reciprocity now in relationship, back and forth. I'm speaking and you're speaking, and I'm more open over these last years than I would ever felt I was able to be, because I couldn't say what it was. So those are ways it's changed in my relationships. Definitely. And if you've been born the golden girl, and in one of my first ideas of career was to be a musical comedy star without any other steps in this process. To have had such a central saving role in the family, to be one among many is the great gift, to learn what that means and to feel it. It's real. All of these are great gifts for me in my ACA recovery.
Thank you so much. Now we have a quick last question. We only have a few minutes, but this last question is, ACA, or a statement and then a question, ACA teaches me to love myself better. How do you love yourself better in your significant relationship with your quote unquote significant other?
Is that a question? How do I do that, or how
Yes.
does one? Okay.
This
How
is
does
about
the
you.
person who wrote the question? How do I do it? Well, by stepping up quickly to take responsibility, to be responsible for what I am, for what I can see at a moment in time. I can't always see right away, but to have that open channel to check my own sarcasm, which has lessened greatly. I'm just thinking about that right now. I used to be very sarcastic and humorous, and to be good to myself, but to be true, and with a partner to be empathic, and also to be able to be angry and to state it. These are not simple traits when defenses were my entire self. How will I present myself to the world? So trying to deal quickly with issues with my husband, and we've been together for 49 years. So I was 2 years in recovery and out of a severely alcoholic first marriage. So there's a long road of growth for the two of us. Being present and willing and knowing to to take a look at what's going on, to be in the present, to understand what I'm experiencing and present it as well as another person. Give them that same opportunity.
Thank you so much. This has been delightful. So that concludes our first segment of the 3. We will now have a 5-minute break. And when we come back, we will introduce our 2 next speakers. Thank you very much, Stephanie B.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Jackie.
Stephanie.
Is that, I don't know who that is. Jackie.
Thank you,
you.
Stephanie. Great job. Awesome.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you.
I don't have the time to do this. Did I put this on? I think I did. Can't remember. Nobody's gonna know where I'm going next week. No.
Okay, we're back, everyone. On to our second segment. I'd like to introduce our next two speakers. Barbara B. began her recovery journey in 4 programs in 1983. ACA recovery began for her in 1986. Of the 5 programs she is a member of, this one brought me to my knees and back again with great gratitude. Barbara is a workshop and retreat leader and has served on the board of NCOA. Tom G. is a man in long-term recovery who lives in Pacific Grove, California. His life has been an evolution of recovery and discovery through various 12-step approaches. A sponsor handed him an ACA book 6 months after he got clean and sober. His life has never been the same since. Take it away, Barbara and Tom.
Well, hey there. We decided that I would go first. Like Barbara, I'm a equal opportunity addict and very grateful ACA and codependent and member of Al-Anon. So here we are. I'm going to speak first, and then Tom's going to speak, and then we're going to take the last part and speak together about our relationship. So right off the bat, what I'd like to say is hello, family. You know, I have a biological family. Most of them are on the East Coast, and I understand my family in 12-step, and they understand me a whole lot better than I understand my biological family. So hello, family. Thank you for having me. Thank you to the group that set up this workshop. It is a labor of love to do these. And thank you, Stephanie, for leading us off. Thanks. When I was thinking about rocking relationships, I started thinking about something I call standard 12-step miracles. And those are the things that I see every day that I never saw before, that were always there, but I never saw them because I didn't have the eyes to see or the ears to hear. It's sort of like that song, there were bells on the hill, but I never heard them ringing. I'll stop singing now. But anyhow, it's that type of thing. So I'm going to talk about relationships as standard 12-step miracles, as far as I'm concerned. And where I want to start with what it was like is, for me, that has to start generations behind me. And some of it is, you know, clearly alcohol, and some of it is clearly just strange dysfunction that all the ways that the children acted and reacted to the elders were very similar to how people acted and reacted to alcoholic elders. So my mother's grandmother and grandfather, there was a whole story about them. There was like a family fable. Everybody has family fables. And I started to check it out on Ancestry. Those family fables did not hold up. And I thought, okay, now what do I do? Do I tell my mom that, you know, that her grandparents were telling fibs about who they were and where they lived and all that stuff? And so that kind of stuff just kind of gets me. It's like, wow, where's the truth here? And in my mother's life, my mother was the third child. And when she was 7 and her brother and sister were 12 and 19, my grandfather left with the lady next door from Pennsylvania out to California. And he never told anybody he was going. And his boss knew he was gone. My grandmother called and called and called. Oh no, we don't know where he is. He just stopped showing up here. And you know, the electric was turned off, the plumbing was, you know, everything was turned off. She lost the house, and she had just come out of, you know, heart surgery. So things happened, like my aunt gave up a full scholarship, a journalism scholarship, so that she could take care of her younger brother and sister and her mother. And just things just go from there. And I remember when my grandmother was probably around 80, we were talking about something else, and she started to cry. And she said to me, they call me Bobby. She said to me, Bobby, why did he leave? Why did he leave? And I thought, I am never going to carry grief like that for 40 years, you know? It just was painful for me to watch her, and I didn't have an answer for her, you know? Not only did he leave, but he came back 7 years later, before he could have been declared dead. And sweet talked my grandmother into signing over, the inheritance back to him. And then he left the next day again. So I say all that because here I am, my mother and her siblings. It impacts everybody, that crazy stuff. My aunt and my uncle both found a partner and stayed with them for decades through thick and thin, no matter what. And that's how they coped with their father taking off and my grandmother's grief. My mother fell in love with, the high school clown who went to the World War II, and my mom went to Penn State and just couldn't see anything different and figured nobody was going to love her because her dad left, and so they got married like this. Oh yeah, it's all going to be fine, and 2 years later I was born, and 5 years later my sister was born, and 6 months after that my mother divorced my father, who was alcoholic and a sex addict. And so that's how it's gone in those generations. My aunt's children, the older one went through several relationships, including one with a man who incested all 7 of their children, and my cousin did not feel like she could leave because the pastor of their church said, oh, no, you have to stay with him. What are you going to do? And I don't think it's such a strange thing to think that her getting cancer and dying very young had something to do with that poison in her, of keeping that secret. And her younger brother also grabbed a hold of somebody and stayed forever. My uncle's kids, one was a stay forever and one was a free divorce. My sister and me, my sister fell in love at 14. She just had her 50th wedding anniversary with this guy. And then there was me. I got married to somebody I had known for 4 weeks because I was turning 29, and I was darned if I was going to be an old maid at 30. So I found the first person who looked like maybe he could like me, and I married him. And a year and a half later, we were divorced. What a surprise, So it's the generational thing that I'm trying to talk about here, that it just doesn't go away without some kind of concerted looking at what the heck's been going on, And I always felt like the kid, like the emperor has no clothes. And I would start to go, but wait. And people would pat me on the head and say, oh, honey. And they would say to everybody else, my mother would say, you have to excuse Bobby. She's just a little high strung. So that was me. I was the high strung one who just wanted to say, there's no clothes over there. So anyhow, that's part of what it was like. It was like somewhat of what I heard Stephanie say too, that there just wasn't a whole lot of truth being told. Nobody talked about my cousin and the incest in their family. Nobody ever, So when I look back at it, when I was a little one, I tap danced as fast as I could. And I was the hero child, grew up. What happened is, after my starter marriage, which is what I call it, my starter marriage, I found an Al-Anon man. And I have to tell you that I have nothing good to say about Al-Anon men. They are fine, gentle, kind, loving human beings. And we decided to get married. It took a year and a half this time. And I needed to get into a wedding dress that I had rented because I had no money. And so a friend of mine said, why don't you try Overeaters Anonymous? I went there. I thought, well, 12 steps, 12 weeks, I'm out of here. I lost the weight. I got in the dress. I started back eating sugar again, but I never stopped going to meetings. And it took me 5 years after that to actually let go of sugar. I would let it go, take it back, let it go, take it back. And that affected my relationships. I would get crazy when I ate too much sugar. I would get angry. I would get sad. And it finally occurred to me that part of the reason I couldn't stop eating sugar was I couldn't stop drinking. And it was all, sugar. It's all the same stuff. So I had started with OA, and then I went to Al-Anon because I had a stepdaughter who was having a lot of trouble with drugs and alcohol. And then in 1986, I started in ACA, and it was the worst pain ever. The starter husband looked totally different from my father, but the unavailability was the same, you know. And I just went, how am I ever going to pick somebody if I can't go by what, you know, I know? So I was in such pain that I finally decided I needed something intellectual to deal with it. So I joined the National Association for Children of Alcoholics, the California chapter, and went on to be a board member for the national chapter. And that helped me balance the ragged feelings, you know, and to be able to be in relationship with other people who knew what I was talking about, you know. So that was what happened. And, you know, Henry and I learned to be in good relationship with each other. And I learned to trust women, you know. So what it's like now is what it was like today, which is a beautiful thing. I have family members who are in recovery. I have a sweetheart who's in recovery. I have a daughter who's in recovery. She has a daughter who's in recovery. She has a husband and a brother-in-law who are in recovery. And those two grandsons came. This is the second time they've come from Sonora to Pacific Grove to help us move, to help Tom and me move. And they were like, of course, about it. Of course, these are young men. They're like 27 and 30, you know, of course we'll come and help you. They call me Grammy. Of course they'll come and help you, Grammy. Of course. And that just made my heart sing. And it still does. So that's what it's like today for me in my recovery. And let me see here. I got a little bit of notes here too. It's very, and I guess we'll talk about that later. Let me just turn this over to Tom, and he can tell about his story, and then we'll talk about what it's been like to try to hang out together. So here he is.
Good. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm honored to be here. Thanks for asking me, Bob. Thank you, Stephanie, for leading it off. You are fantastic as always. So I being a little cloudy on what my time would be best spent on. I focus more on my personal story, and I'm an alcoholic, and I'm in recovery from that, and also ACA, two parents, both alcoholic. All of my family of origin died of substance use disorder. So I can't tell my story without weaving it through, but I'm primarily going to focus on, you know, what it was like in my family of origin, what happened, and what it's like now, through a lot of grace and program work that I've been able to enjoy now on my second wonderful relationship, which is really just budding. But I grew up in Oakland, California, in a family of 5. I was the youngest of 3 children. My brother was 10 years younger than my brother, and 6+ than my sister. So both my parents worked and drank alcohol and smoked cigarettes every day. There was a vacuum of emotion because there was little time for intimacy. Everyone was busy doing their own thing. I just determined fairly recently that, you know, in Claudia Black's book, I would be the lost child. I mean, I was just kind of out there by myself in those early years. The first 10 years of my childhood were somewhat normal because my parents' disease really was in mid-course of its progression. And I want to make that point that the youngest always suffers the most. I'm following up on the golden girl and the hero here. And I was a lost child, in trouble all the time, forgotten about it. I felt like an afterthought but most of my life. And for that reason, very unlovable, which really caused me a lot of pain. But fear dominated my relationship with my dad, especially because he would ultimately administer the discipline which were strappings with a belt on bare skin. And that didn't do me well. Later in life, that was a trauma point that unconsciously really caused me a lot of pain. I didn't trust my mother either because she was complicit, with dad and very unjust, of course. But I was a kid being a kid and was reprimanded on top of 12 years of Catholic school, which was a pretty stern bunch and very, very conservative and by the book. So we grew up. I was very close to my sister. We were arm in arm, and she was the angel in my life. Thank goodness. I thank God for her, and I miss her terribly. But we would cringe. My parents would work hard, play hard. Alcohol ran everything in the family. My aunts and uncles owned bars in Oakland. All this family activities would center around the bar and alcohol, of course. But they would go out dancing and drinking and socializing on Friday and Saturday nights if they went out. And when they come home, my sister and I'd be home in the house. She'd be an older, and we'd be terrified when we heard the car pull in the driveway. And of course, I was ignorant to. I had no idea why I was even scared, but we knew that a fight would probably jump off more times than not. Sometimes physical violence. And of course, we were two little kids in the other room, just hoping that they would go to bed and we could finally get to sleep. And that underlying fear that alcohol brought in the house really affected my view of the world. And relationships for me in the future would also end up centering around alcohol. It was just part of my childhood. I didn't know anything differently. Anybody who didn't drink to me was an oddball. And I would defend the family honor, really unaware of the binding shame that really ruled all of us. And that affected me deeply in that I always felt less than. I never felt on the par with anybody else, even though I was a smart kid. I did well in school for a while until it just was obviously nobody was paying attention. My report cards would sit in the mailbox and there was neither praise nor discipline for them because nobody opened them up. So from that point on, there was no praise and there was no motivation for me as a kid to do well. And when I was about 10, my mother had a back operation. She was a professional cook and my father ran a pretty good sized trucking company. And so she was a professional before her time. She was Henry J. Kaiser's, of Kaiser Industries personal chef. So she knew what she was doing. She was the top of her profession. So a kind of an absentee mom, and my sister filled in with that, fortunately. And she got a back injury and was like the early poster child of the opioid addiction. And from that point on, there was mom was not really present in any of the mothering duties. And that's when I discovered my caretaking abilities, which just naturally becoming a helper, which was part of my Al-Anon program and CODA program to this day, is that I work on setting boundaries, especially in my professional ranks within I work, that it has to be very clear. And it really boils down to me realizing what's your stuff and what's my stuff. And as a byproduct of my childhood, my big problem was I couldn't be honest or authentic. I was always faking it. I was a people pleaser, trying to stay out of trouble and not get punished. But I really didn't have any idea who was home. And nor was that encouraged. As far as feelings go, I was either angry or I was okay. There was no in between. I couldn't name any emotions. So completely illiterate in that because of the lack of people telling me how I felt when I was a little kid. giving me feedback and, working on these things. That just never happened in my family. So later on, my relationships with people, us ACAs, us people that grew up in alcoholic families, it was like we had magnets in ourselves. We found each other. We got into trouble together. We never really knew why. It was just one of those things, and we became the bad actors. And so I got tossed out of a couple of schools. My own drinking became prevalent around 15 or 16, and they mailed me my diploma. I was married before I graduated. It was just a rocky ride. Later on, that marriage, like Barbara's starter marriage, didn't last a year and a half. Then later on, I was the 60s, and lots of stuff was going on in the 60s. And so I dabbled in alcohol. I was a veteran in that, but a lot of all the drugs that came along, Tom was there to sample them all. So I met a woman during that time, kind of a turbulent time in California. And we really had a really good woman that we had a good relationship in spite of both. As I said earlier, all my relationships were bonded on the use of drugs and alcohol. So we drank together and we used together, but we managed to have a love relationship, and we had a couple of children. And then she stopped drinking for the most part, and I couldn't. So my progression spiraled out of control. And ultimately, we got divorced. And around that time, I was 38 years old, and my mother had just committed suicide on opiates and alcohol. And my father had already died of lung cancer from cigarettes. And my sister died of cirrhosis in her early 40s, which broke my heart. And my brother would die later of cigarette use and lung cancer as well. So it wiped out my family. I was a very, pissed off individual. And I became homeless. I just saw life as meaningless. I worked hard. I had started 2 companies. My goal was to become a millionaire by 50, and there's not a doubt in my mind that would have happened. Not an admirable goal, and it wasn't possible because of my alcoholism. So I found myself giving up on life, went into what I see as a major depression now, and ended up on the street. And I was abstinent for 7 years. I did not drink to try to save the marriage, but I was not in recovery. I want to make that point, that this spiritual program helped me to get that honesty, that view of myself that was to be that authentic Tom that I never knew. And so night and day, the marriage got ruined by my behaviors, my thinking, I ended up on the street. I just threw everything away, and I drank for a living for 10 years. After that, I got into, and I was amongst my own people then. Everybody was as miserable as me, and I was right at home, so I was in no hurry to get out, nor did I see any future. But lo and behold, I did a lot of jail time, this and that, and nothing any terribly serious, just vagrancy and drunk in public and petty thefts and on, all that kind of stuff. And I ended up in a courtroom in Berkeley, and the judge sentenced me to treatment at 49 years old. And I have been in and out of jail, tell me hundreds of times, and never once, everybody knew I was an alcoholic, but never once off treatment. So any rate, that was the miracle in my life. And I was not good at accepting love. I wouldn't let anybody care about me because I didn't think that was possible. But these people, and this 3 people in particular, hung in there with me. One, I'm the founder of the program, Davita, and another Catholic priest, Father Bill, who just wouldn't let me give up myself, nor would the judge, who kept throwing me back in the program. Throw me in jail, throw me back in the program. I go, what's wrong with you people? Can't you see this is hopeless? But they didn't. And that was the first time in my life that somebody believed in me so I could believe in myself. And once I had a spiritual awakening in the county jail, and I said, It was really my first sober thought. And I said to myself, these people care more about you, Tom, than you care about yourself. That did it. That did not make me happy. And I decided to give it a chance. And my higher power, of course, made all that possible. And from that time on, I did the program, which was a very short program, but I was bought into the 12-step by that time. I was actively working on it. And David and I was volunteering at the program. I was going back to school at 50, going back to college and working on a professional career. So like Stephanie said, my professional and personal recoveries are very intertwined every step of the way. So it's hard to separate that out as well. So I got in this fabulous relationship with Davida, the one who threw me an ACA book 6 months in from my sobriety date. So I read that, and that's why it's in my bio. My life is never the same. You guys understand that. As Barbara said, you are my family. We totally get that. That was the bomb in my life that made it more clear. It lifted a lot of the shame off of me, and I could see it. And I got into this relationship with Davida, who was a doctor and way out of my league, but loved me back and never had a good relationship herself. So we got to two people in recovery, desperate for a really good, loving relationship. And it was rocky. It was rocky about getting ego out of there. And, you know, for me, realizing, you know, stuff like, oh, she's supposed to be happy too. And that's what she had to start with. Oh, for heaven's sake, I never thought of that. You know, and getting a, you know, world beyond the end of my nose is what I like to call it. Exploring that wonderful world is outside of myself. And so I was doing a lot of personal work and, you know, doing overtime in both programs and doing a lot of retreats with ACA. And we built a program together that works with poor alcoholics, homeless people, people out of mental institutions, jails and prisons. And that was a joy that we worked together professionally, but the real joy was with each other. And we got to grow like human beings that were dying of thirst. You know, it was just something that didn't have to happen in our lives. I remind myself of the grace and the blessings in my lives all the time that our personal relationship grew based on trust. And for me, on 3 levels: trust in myself, and trust in a power greater than myself, and trust in that person that was loving me. And you know, that was not easy. And for me to love was pretty easy. I'm a caretaker. I love people. It's hard for me to admit that sometimes but my actions speak differently. So anyhow, we had a blissful relationship, dancing in recovery around the 12 steps. You know, it was so good for me. I learned that, you know, she could do something that hurt my feelings or was wrong, and I could do the same. But after 3 or 4 years of commitment that kept us in that relationship, there wasn't a day that went by I said, this ain't working, I'm out of here. 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And she was doing the same thing, but we really got committed to making it work, and it did. And it got to be, we didn't really have to say anything because I knew she was working a program, and I knew I couldn't work a program any better than I was because I didn't know how. I had every bit of energy in me trying to in recovery and discovery. And so that went on, and it was like this 16-year pink cloud. We knew each other 20 years, and about 14 years in, Davida got a cancer diagnosis, and that was a sobering moment. All of a sudden, this pink cloud ran right into a wall, and for 2 years we did treatments. I told her, I'm with you every step of the way. By this time, this program we started was really large. I was the executive director. She got to retire And that's when the love deepens. And that's the unfair part. We grew closer and we knew it was going to end. And man, did that take every bit of everything positive, to emotional growth, spiritual growth, to work that program like we never worked it before, and ultimately knowing what was going to happen, and did. Then 4 years ago, I found myself alone. Davida had died, and before Barbara tunes back in, we're going to talk about our relationship. It was the process I went through, and I'll start with that, of what I wanted to do after Davida died. I didn't know anything else, and I said, well, what do I do now? Well, I could continue the work that we did together. I make sure I grieve. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'll do exactly what I would tell a client to do. I will be the client. And I did that, and I won't be in denial. And I will be with those feelings that I can really understand and name now because of the program. And I embraced the grief, and I embraced the loss. And it gave me great comfort to know that was exactly how I should feel, and it was okay. And that they had their own power in my life, and I just had to coincide with whatever grief felt like doing, I had to honor. And so at that point on, Davida was gone, and I worked on what's next. And then I decided, well, do I get in a relationship again? And you know, I said to myself, well, the best years of my life have been since I've been in recovery, of course, but they've also been in the relationship with Davida. So I don't pretend that we can recapture that or go back in time, but I knew that I needed to meet a woman who was like-minded, had similar experience, was working on herself and taking care of herself, and that I wanted to be able to share joy. I wanted to be able to share grief. It just makes life so much better for me that I ran into Barbara, and I'm going to turn it back over to her.
Oh my God. I just want to sit here and kiss him now. So my half of this story is that Henry and I were together for about 25 years. And the last 5 years of that, he had a cancer diagnosis also. And anybody who's ever had somebody that they loved that had cancer, you know, it's almost impossible to talk about, but we got through it together, and people would come in and say to him, we're going to pray for you to, you know, to get well. And he would say, no, pray for the best possible outcome. And I would say, no, pray for him to get well. Okay. But I thought it was the bravest thing I ever heard, to be able to admit that maybe we didn't know what the best possible outcome was, that maybe God knew, you know? And so he died in April of 2008. And I was, you know, it was the best relationship I had ever had. I had, you know, ran roughshod through Philadelphia for years, and before I came out here. And so I just started saying, you know what, God, I don't know what you have in store, but I tell you what, if you have another relationship in store for me, let me just write down a couple of things I think I would like, and a couple of things I think I would not like. So I wrote this list, and then I looked at it and I said, well, shit, that's Henry. Oh, well. And I put it aside. It was in my journal. And then I met Tom. And I hadn't met him and Davida, you know, before on one of Bob's cruises. And we were on a cruise together again. And I went over and I said to him, because Bob had told me that Davida had died, and I just felt so sad. And I said to him, you know, I know what it's like to lose the person you love the best in the whole world. And I'm here. And if you need to come and knock on the door and wake me up at 3 in the morning to talk, you do it. I'm here. I know what you're going through. And so that's how it started. So we just took it a little slow. And I kept saying, it's too soon, Tom. And Tom kept saying, you grieve your way, Barbara, and I'll grieve mine. Okay. So we just, you know, we just walked it one day at a time, you know, like we're taught to do in program. and, bumps up and down and, grieving and going, oh my God, and both of us came to, would it be too selfish to want two wonderful, wonderful relationships in our life,
Is there a law against that?
and we decided we couldn't find one and we weren't going to make one up. And so we decided that, yes, in our late 60s, it might be kind of wonderful, not only for us, but for other people to know that, love and romance and passion, not only possible, but wonderful and available. Working a program, dealing with the stuff and getting it out of the way.
Our relationship has been kind of a dance, like all early relationships. And, I'll just build on, we were riding to a ball game. I was at a conference back in Washington, DC, and we decided to Uber over to a Baltimore Orioles Oakland A's game. And the kid in front, he was very interested and very giddy about us romantic two in the back seat. And I said, well, young man, let me tell you one thing, because he was telling us about his relationships. I said, well, romance at 70, which I just turned 70, is no different than 17. It's the same feelings. It's the same thrill. And he was just like grinning ear to ear. So that was fun to say. And we've had fun because kind of going against the grain. I just don't know that many people that have lost the love of their life. And that was another requirement for me, that I needed somebody that had been in a good relationship and knew what that meant, built on trust and using the program, rolling with it. And I found it. And at any rate, I think we had a distance relationship. Barbara had a house, 30 miles from me, and we go during COVID, and we go spend 2 days at each other's house. She had a cat and go home and feed the cat, and I'd go to work, and we had this long-term target, and we've been working on a relationship, getting to know each other. We're not spring chickens. We try not to be set in our ways, but you are to a degree. So meeting in the middle on that is requiring all the program has to offer. But I think we're both committed, and it's already paying off. That we have sold our homes. No easy task. Survived this far in COVID. I'm still working part-time as a consultant, but we're going on a cruise, 6-month cruise in January, the Love Boat, right? and we just moved into an apartment together. We sold our homes and didn't want to buy anything in this crazy market, so we're renting something together. We're in our second week here, moving in furniture and having little squabbles and all this good stuff that they don't last long,
And after 4 years, this is the first time that we've actually lived together where one of us couldn't go home if we had a problem. It's like, oh man, this is it. We live here, and it's kind of wonderful. So, and we were ready. We were really ready. I pulled out that list that I had written in my journal somewhere along the way, maybe a year or so in, when we were seeing each other. And I looked at it and I said, wow, this is Tom. I called him up and I said, listen to this. And I read him the list and he said, yeah. I said, that's you. And he's like, ooh. It's that kind of.
She pulled it out of the drawer and read it to me.
I did. That evolution of, wow. Standard 12-step miracles, it's a miracle that this could happen, So anyhow, anything else you want to say about this?
I don't know how we're doing on time.
Looks like you have about 5-6 minutes.
Okay.
So I want to talk about something, and my recovery goes on and on with ACA. I just it's like a new life. There's just no question. It is a new life, and for me, and this happened fairly recently, that anger caused me a lot of problems, and that was because of neglect. And I realized that, and I work in state prisons with people that really, really, really had terrible childhoods. And I always thought of myself, well, comparing myself to other people, what a ninny you are. Talking a little neglect, you didn't get sexually abused, it wasn't, you had beatings, but it wasn't beyond recognition or anything as a child. But the emotional toll and the neglect and the unlovability that I felt because nobody was there. They were busy doing what they did and drinking. So I wasn't even in the picture and felt very unimportant because of that. And I was a very angry guy. That is going to wreck with any relationship. But just in the last 5 or 6 years is my program made things more clear. I was able to really think about the disease of alcoholism and the effects on Tom's family, going back generations, as Barbara was referring to. And I wasn't really able to let go of the anger until I put myself in my parents' shoes. My dad was an immigrant at 12 years old from Ireland. No doubt his dad died over there and they shipped him off to Oakland, California. No, there's not a doubt in my mind he died of alcoholism or something related. And my dad grew up without a dad, and thinking about the job he did do in spite of his own alcoholism is pretty remarkable. And my mother would these days would be a female superstar, being a high regarded chef as a female in the field she was in. I didn't get any of that. I was ashamed, and it dawned on me that AA hadn't even hit the West Coast of the United States when they were in their heyday. Their disease has hit its, was way in its progression. There wasn't even AA there for them. So what chance did they have? And they were loving people, and I know that. And they meant well, and they provided well, but ultimately the whole family was doomed because of this disease. And it's something that none of us asked for. But nonetheless, is a huge part in the path of our lives.
The neglect thing certainly came up in my life too. My dad lived 8 blocks from us, and he never came to see us, and he never paid child support. And, I remember my sister and me getting dressed up on Sundays when he was supposed to come in our pretty little dresses and whatever. And we'd sit on the front stoop and, no, Dad, one more time, and so that can mess. Certainly I hear now with a young man, but it certainly messes with a girl's sense of who she is too. So
I think that's about it. And, we intend to live happily ever after.
I was just going to say that. Yes, we do.
I should speak in I statements, but I think
Well, thank you so much for sharing.
you're
Barbara.
welcome. Thank you for having us.
Pleasure.
You're welcome. So now we're going to segue into our question and answer. So if the question was yours and you feel so inclined to correct me, let me know. But our first question was, okay, it's a little complicated sentence. So I'm going to try to do this. So this gentleman talked about, you mentioned the family, it said the family myth to me sounds a little more tolerant than the family fables that you described in your family generations of difficulty in being fable free. Why did you want to shield your mother from your discovery of this? And this was targeted to Barbara.
Because I'm a codependent and I need 8,000 Al-Anon meetings and ACA meetings. And I moved to California to get a master's, and I got I was going to go back to Pennsylvania. I love California. Oh my God, the weather, and people were very open-minded. And I could not bear to tell my mother that I wasn't coming back. So I started a second master's program. Now that's pretty serious. You don't have to. So, and then I got married to the starter marriage. And then, between education and marriage, well, of course you can't come back. But I don't know. I just felt like, my dad was gone, and I was pretty clear that it was my job to take care of Mom so that I would be okay and my sister would be okay and she would be okay.
Well, thank you so much. Our next question is for both of you. How do you prepare yourself for a relationship? How do you know when you're at a point in recovery that you're ready? This is to both of you.
Yeah.
You want to go first?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
It had been a long time for me. I mean, Henry had been dead for 10 years, and I kept saying, you know, God, I'm cute. I have a house. I have an education. I have money. You know, I'm a really nice person. I'm in recovery. Where are the men? You know, and I just kept waiting and just trusting God. And then all of a sudden, there he was. And I kept saying, oh, really? Come on. No. He's just lost his wife. And I just had to trust. I had to trust that that God, you know, I said to God, let me know, you know, and let me know. And there he was. So
I think for me, there was some groundwork done before that. And that's what I can say today versus prior to my recovery life is that what's important is who you surround yourself with. And I latch on to people these days. I said, I need you in my life, like it or not. I hope you agree because I'm going to bother you. I'm not even shy about that anymore. And as far as, you know, spotting that person you would like to possibly, you don't know, say, Barbara had a list very clear about 20 attributes. And I go like, okay, you really thought this through. I had a short list, but knowing that you have to be bold, you have to put your feelings on your sleeve, and you have to just go out there and let it be known. You know, let it be known, walk through that fear of rejection, which all comes from undone ACA work, and that fearless that if she said, well, no, I'm not ready for a relationship. Okay, I asked. A big part of my recovery I base on my decision making is how do I come out of this without any regrets? So if you miss the love of your life because you were afraid to ask, you're going to regret it. So don't let that happen. I hope that helps.
me too.
Thank you. We have some more questions for you. Okay, the next one to both of you. I'm fresh in my recovery and sometimes struggle with speaking my truth to my partner because I'm afraid of my partner's reactions. Any advice?
That happens with me sometimes too, because this is a very big personality and a very big human, and yeah. Anyhow, so what I pretty much do is just pray again and say, you know what, God, if there's something you want me to say, show me the opening and give me the words, and then I wait.
I think for me, a lot of it is does this really need to be said? Again, going back to, I know Barbara works a serious program or 6 serious programs. I can't keep up with them all, but she's very serious about being authentic, being honest, working on herself. And relationships are a whole nother, I want to call it a dance, but that's, and feelings are involved in, and that I ask myself, number one, is this something, you know, is this important to say? Or I know they're working on themselves, are they going to work it out themselves? So about the criticism of people, which we can be sensitive to us ACAs, right? I'm a little careful with that. But if it needs to be said, I'll try. Now, catch me at the end of the day when I'm hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. I just try not. And sometimes I get trapped in, I just end up taking my foot out of my mouth, which I don't like doing. But it's how you lead up to it, the conversation, and package it in a way of coming from a place of love. And loving criticism, you know, if it's not well received, again, that's their stuff. And there's, you know, I'm powerless over your stuff. But I did my part to package it and put it in a constructive way. That's all I can do.
Loving curiosity. Sometimes I just have to say, you know, I'm really curious about your reaction or why you did that. It's not that I think you're wrong. I'm just curious because we're new. I mean, even 3.5 years, we're new. So yeah.
Thank you for that. Our next one is, for both of you, when should you persevere through difficulty in a relationship as opposed to leaving the relationship, parentheses, while working your recovery?
Somebody once said to me, you know, is your life better with him or without him? You know, and there's stuff, you know, you don't get to be 70 without having stuff, even if you have had a good great relationship before, you know, there's getting to know you, there's, oh my God, there's hurt feelings about having been neglected before. I don't know that there's a hard and fast rule about it. You know, pray. Pray.
I agree. You definitely pray and listen, meditate, get some consultation with your higher power on these things. But I know the relationships take patience, and there's just a lot of crap that happens in the beginning. You can't put a lot on. It's just feeling each other out and really getting to understand each other. And like anything else in this life, this relationship is not going to turn out exactly like you planned, right? It may be way more joyful than you ever had planned, but that's everything in life in recovery, right? It never turns out like we planned. You know, what they say, what gives higher power a sense of humor is our best laid plans. So I think check your commitment is did you make a mistake?
Mhm.
Is it, you know, what, and being honest with you, what is my motivation here? What am I looking for here in this other person? Is it looks? Is it money? Is it soul? Is it that I want somebody who's capable? And that's why I said, Barbara's had a good relationship. We talked about Henry. We talk about Davida openly. There's, you know, there can't be any competition in our relationship and what we had before. But those are definitely building blocks. So I think it depends on, is this a new relationship? Is this your second try at a really good relationship? I don't know.
Or are you still banging your head against the same wall?
Yeah. And look at yourself, you know, look at your motivation.
Thank you. Okay, our next one. What can one do if one's, and this is for either of you, what can one do if one's partner has problems where they would be helped by a 12-step program, but they don't know it yet?
Go to Al-Anon. Go to Al-Anon and just over and over, you know. There's an acronym that we talk about in Al-Anon for detach. Don't even think about changing him or her. Oh my God. You know, there was a book out that said, I love you, you're perfect, now change. You know, I mean, I didn't have to read the book. That was enough for me. I love you, you're perfect, now change.
Well, Barbara's absolutely right. I mean, you got to do your own homework. You got to take care of yourself. You got to work on your part in it. And Al-Anon is certainly the place you'll get a lot of commiseration, but that's a tough one. Is I get a lot of calls from parents whose children are out there using or loved ones, and you know, it's that you got to draw the line somewhere, and you got to stand by it. And you know, when it's affecting you in a negative way, you got to go to a meeting, or you know, maybe abandon the relationship.
Get yourself a sponsor and work the steps about it.
Yeah, it might not be a go, you know. But you gave it a try, so you won't have regrets, right?
We have time for at least one more question. If you want to email Lisa your question, we do have a little bit of time. We might have time for two.
We could take a longer break.
And breathe.
Yeah. Can't hear you.
You know, you're muted now.
I'll just reiterate what you said about you can't change other people. You know, Al-Anon is kind of made for that as well. So these programs all target very specific things. So make use of what each of them offers. Okay, I do have a question. What type of relationship do you have with your children?
Well, I married 2 used men and inherited 5 stepchildren and never had any of my own. And it's very different. From the starter husband, the kids don't have any addiction, but they've got, they're related to their father. So they had, some problems, but I've got some relationships with those grandchildren from that marriage. Henry had 1 child of his own and 2 stepchildren. And I helped to raise his child from the time she was 11. And so I'm still very close to her. And her older brother, I thought he was going to be dead by the time he was 21. I didn't think he was going to make it. And he just had like 23 years clean and sober. God love him. I mean, it's amazing. And then the sister, I don't see, she is just so deep in her disease that there's no coming up for air right now. So.
And for me, that's a tough one because my blood children, I have no communication with. I know where they're at. They know where I'm at. The lines of communication have always been open, but I had brief interaction with my daughter for a while, but my second wife kind of poisoned the well. And my program tells me that I've done my part to apologize, which I have done. I would like to do more of that, but I have to wait for that door to open without doing any more damage. But the real children I have in my life are the non-blood people around me that, and this sounds funny, but most of the people I work with in prison have taken lives and they have had life sentences, but I work with them and get them a professional career and they've gotten out. And those are the ones that email me on Father's Day. I have such relationships outside of blood now, on and on and on, that my life is full. And again, it's improbable. Who knows what higher power is going to do, but my family is just truly international. I brought Barbara I threw a party in my backyard, or something. A couple of the people that came out of prison threw it for me to honor me, a barbecue. And Barbara was early on, sat there and looked around. I don't know what your thoughts on that were.
I was scared.
It looks like the United Nations, but the love that's there is so.
And the tenderness under the rough was wonderful.
Because they've never had those people in their lives either, and they're so appreciative that loyalty that's genuine. I didn't bring this up in my talk about a big deal for me that got me in a lot of trouble was being loyal where loyalty wasn't deserved, and that just doesn't happen anymore. So these are bonds I have friends that are loyal and I'm loyal to them.
Okay, now we got a very quick one, so I don't know if you can do this quickly.
Okay.
But what is an example of when your changes in recovery made another person uncomfortable? What did they do? What did you do?
Oh yeah, that's a quick one.
I was going to say, maybe not.
Yeah, I know I pissed off a lot of people. I think a lot of people, when Barbara and I got into a relationship, they didn't like that. They were used to me being with Davida. We were mom and pop to a lot of people. And I could tell, and they kind of stonewalled Barbara, and you really know who your friends are. Oh, I can't say that, but you give them time to warm up, and I think that they are being more accepting, but people aren't ready for that. But I'm known to make bold decisions and make them fairly quickly. So.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your
Thank you. It was wonderful.
share. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Okay.
Been a pleasure.
Yeah, so we're going to go into our next 5-minute break, and we'll be back with our last set of speakers.
Can I ask Tom a quick question? It doesn't have to do with a question about this.
No, sure.
My name's Sherry, and I live up in Northern California. I used to live in Santa Barbara, and I knew a woman named Davida a long time ago, and I'm just wondering if this is the same one that you've spoken about. She used to be an exercise teacher. She was in 12-step programs. I knew her in a couple of 12-step programs. She used to live up in, where is it? Where the windmills. Anyhow, I was just wondering if this was the same one because
I
not a common.
Solving.
Yes, yes. That was
No,
her?
I think it's another Davita. The one I married was an international medical doctor.
Nope.
Yeah.
Sorry, thank you.
That's
But
okay.
I did know a Davidas.
There's not that many Davitas around.
No,
so
there's not.
because-
That's why I was
yeah.
like, whoa. So
Yeah,
thank
thanks for asking.
Thank you for clarifying. Thank you.
Sure,
Thank you, Bud, for your share.
Thanks,
Thank
Tom and
you.
Barb.
welcome.
Okay, we are back, everyone. We are going to go into our final third and our two speakers, Beth and Bob, and I will read their intros. Beth started her recovery journey in 1992. She has experience in several 12-step programs and has immense gratitude for the tools recovery has given her. They are indispensable in all relationships, home, work, and community. She and Bob have been together since 2008 and love walking the path together. Bob began his journey in ACA in 1989 when he heard a story very close to his for the first time in a meeting different from the 12-step program he began recovery in. In 1991, he attended a conference on intimacy where the majority of the speakers were well-known early pioneers in ACA. The conference theme, intimacy, me being me and letting you see me in a healthy way, brought on a new level of discovery and opened the doors to recovery in ACA. It changed his life in a positive way. He is a domestic and international workshop leader. Topics include how and why the 12 steps work, developing healthy relationships, and I think the last part of this got cut off, Bob. So we will have you fill in the information and give it to you two.
Okay. Hi, I'm Beth. I'm in recovery. I'm an ACA, and I'm going to talk a little bit, and then Bob will talk a little bit, and then we'll talk a little bit together. I can relate to a lot of what has been said today. I think there are threads that go through all of our lives, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my family history and my 80 proof gene pool, and you can kind of see how things trickle down. With alcoholism in my family goes back at least 2 generations, and I'm sure it probably goes back 26 generations, but I just don't know that much. And there were a lot of secrets in our family, missing information, things that we just did not talk about, that sort of thing. And the best one that comes to mind for me is when I was about 10, I got an Easter card from a grandfather, my mom's dad, who she told me he was dead. So me being me, I said, what is this, Hallmark from the grave or what? You know, and she had to confess that it was easier to tell me he was dead than to explain what happened. And so for my parents, they both lost a parent very young. My dad's mom died during gallbladder surgery when he was 9, and my mom's dad left the family when she was very young. And I was the only child, and I always kind of felt like the tennis ball between the two of them. I took on all the roles. You know, I wanted to be the good girl. I was responsible. I got straight A's. I took music. I did everything I could, and it didn't help at home. I became an addict later, and well, actually earlier. And I married an alcoholic addict and divorced him, and went many years before I met Bob. And it wasn't like I just met Bob, you know. I had a lot of really poor decisions and people that I should not have been with in between, but I was especially crazy. I can relate most to, I was the peacemaker because that was my assigned job in our family. And I remember my mom sitting me down and saying, you know, can you just talk to your father? Because if you ask him to stop drinking and lose some weight, he loves you and he'll do what you ask. And at the time, I remember thinking, I need to take the bus to kindergarten, Mom. You know, hello. It was very young where I realized things are not okay. Yeah, I related to the duct tape because I carry what I call spiritual duct tape, and it really saves me sometimes because I have a lot of good ideas and I like to say them out loud, and that is not helpful. And that's something about relationships that Bob and I have a good balance about like healthy confrontation and saying what we see and if we're concerned or whatever. And we both have our own path as well as our path together. The analogy that I've heard is about when people get married, sometimes they carry a candle up and then they light the mutual candle and then they blow out their candle. And our commitment is to not blow out our candle, basically. And when I was growing up, there's a lot of focus about what I looked like. And I think that the confusing part for me was that other people were told how great I was, but the message I got at home was that I didn't, I was never thin enough, and that I was just left with this feeling of I just was not capable of anything, doing anything right. And right before I moved out in high school, I starved myself through high school, sugar binge at night. And then I remember my mom and I went to a child psychologist because she would not let me do my laundry. And the bottom line is the woman said, why can't she do her laundry? And my mom said, well, she might ruin something. And the woman said, let her ruin something. And my mom walked out and we never saw the woman again. So I really appreciate her. I don't even know who she was now. So when I was growing up, we lived in this very small house. My parents had a little motel up in Paradise, California, and chaos ruled. Like people would come to the door right in the middle of dinner. Hey, can we have a room for the night? And, okay, and it was just normal, but after dinner, things got really quiet. And the reason that they did is my dad drank, and his name was Gordon, and he loved vodka. And he did not own the company. And my mom this is so convoluted. She had drank when my parents met, and then she went to AA for a little while, and then she switched to Valium. And so after dinner, I would go to my room and I would grab a big bowl of ice cream and go in there and read and read and read. And everybody was all, self-medicated and checked out. And so I got used to, I think, I may be insane, but I was not crazy. And so I knew that I was safer playing out, in the creek behind the motel or under the culvert, or I'm sitting behind the Christmas tree during the holidays and reading a book and just being very quiet. I would hide under the buildings and go look around. It was me and my mom's 6 cats, we were all sitting around going, what the hell is this? Nobody was home. Everybody was there, but nobody was home. So one thing I did want to mention is that what recovery has given me is a higher power of my own understanding. And when I started OA in 1992, I remember going home and I had hope for the first time. And as I was growing up, on Sundays, I went to church with all my different, girlfriends from school, but nothing ever stuck. I never got anything from that, except I didn't have to clean toilets on Sunday mornings, bonus. And so I would go. And, but when I got to recovery, consequently, I did not believe in anything within myself and nothing outside of myself. So I was really lucky because I was teachable. I guess that's the luck part. And the most important thing for me for recovery is I can take that stuff that I'm not proud of, or my experience, that we think nobody else has, and people do. And eventually you'll bump into somebody and I say, oh, me too. And I'll say, oh my gosh, here's what happened. Because, I think that we carry so much shame in the doors. And sometimes we get it in the rooms too, honestly. But mainly when we come in the doors, we're just so bleeding and on fire and broken. And, it just, if I can make my past useful to someone, that is just the best. When I also had the starter husband, and we got together when we were just like nuts, and we were together for like 16 years and got divorced, which was very appropriate, and we left on good terms, and we just had totally different life paths. Like I didn't want to grow dope with his sister in Crescent City. And we were good on amends. And so then there were these 10 years where I was by myself, me and my dog. And when I met Bob, we weren't looking, about 15 years ago, and I have to tell this story. I had talked to somebody about working the third step about my love life, and I was just about done. I have met, so many Mr. Wrongs, and I thought, well, some people have a little bit, but then there's this deal breaker thing. So I made a list too, and I think for me, it's like, my higher power, universe, whoever is looking over my shoulder and kind of going, well, I think I know what Beth wants, but okay, well, maybe, and then when I write something down, it's like something happens, all the momentum shifts, and somebody goes, oh, hey, come on, we're on it now. We know what she wants. And then if I just pray and wait, sometimes, okay. It just works out, So the things that are important to me about our relationship, we met through travel and through Barbara, and we went to therapy really early in our relationship because we knew we were both ACA, and when we would have discussions, it felt like there were a couple of toddlers running around, and we knew that's not how we wanted to be, And so what I can tell you about clean and sober love is that's that thing about you need to change everything. I have to have, Bob gives me a firm foundation of I can trust him no matter what. I can say stuff that's hard. I can admit parts of me I'm not proud of. I can tell him the truth. And I remember early in therapy, we just looked at each other and our therapist said, are you committed to each other? And we said, yes, So some of the things that we've said to each other early on, I said, just keep talking to me. Just keep talking to me. And we still use that. And it helps because I know that, he's my soft place to land. And I know that we can talk through anything. It doesn't matter what it is. So I think that's about it for me, really. I want to hear from you. House. Okay.
My name's Bob. I'm a recovering adult child and multiply addicted to all sorts of things. And thankfully, recovery is one of them. The first thing I want to say is thank you so much to the ACA Healing Fellowship. When COVID hit, my home group shut down and didn't open up a Zoom meeting. And I had a little bit of a sense of floundering. And somehow or another, I landed in the midst of a group of people. And the ACA Healing Fellowship has become my family. And I'm getting ready to make my first jaunt to Waller Park because I can't wait to meet people in person because the only folks that I know in person are people that I've been connected with in sponsorship and so on, which is a mainstay of relationship, sponsorship and sponsees. And I also want to say thank you to the committee members who have worked so diligently. This is the fourth or fifth workshop that the ACA Healing Fellowship has put on. And the people behind the scenes are really awesome. They work diligently to get everything organized and so on. And then a special thank you to Stephanie, Tom, and Barbara, and to Beth. I am so overwhelmed with gratitude and love and information right now that I probably could go on and on and on for a very long time. So I'm going to condense some of my thoughts and some of my feelings. I just want to take a minute, and maybe everyone else can too, to take 30 seconds and just close your eyes and ask yourself, why am I here right now? I don't know if that was challenging for anyone, but when I first started coming into workshops and recovery and just into meetings, when I was given the opportunity to think about what I felt internally, I almost had panic attacks. I just had no idea about anything in life. I really didn't. Later on, I heard it framed that I had received the gift of desperation, which interestingly enough, I only thought of the other day. My epiphany for the week was that gift of desperation is God. It's just another transformational way to think about a higher power for me, because I had been trying my entire life to make things make sense, because my world in my childhood made no sense at all. I grew up in a family where I was supposed to be the next in a long line of Methodist ministers. And my grandfather was, my maternal grandfather was a very revered man in a Protestant denomination. And when he spoke, there would be receiving lines because his message was so powerful. And my parents were married to one another and divorced from one another twice. And each time they were married, a child became part of the marriage, and then my father left immediately. And I did not find out till I was 43 years old. A lot of that was around the craziness that was going on in the family of origin. I've heard neglect mentioned today. My first actual relationship that I could relate to was trying to override the neglect that I felt, and I had no words for that. I grew up around babysitters. We moved 11 times by the time I was 12 years of age. So it was impossible for me to form any sort of cohesive bonding in the community. I had not spent 3 years at the same elementary school until I landed in Wilmette, Illinois, which was about the 8th move. And I was there for 3 years, and I was so competitive and aggressive that I really didn't feel a sense of communication or make friends until about 3 months before the end of the school year in 6th grade, at which time it was announced that we were moving all the way across the country to California, and once again uprooted. So until I got to recovery in 1988, I had been living on the idea that somehow, some way I could figure it out, and by my own drives, I would be able to make the world change to the way I had always wanted it to be in my childhood and in my growing up experience. There's a lot of powerlessness in that, and it simply is impossible, because the world is the way that the world is. And my main challenges in recovery, even today, are that I'm literally powerless over almost everything. And so when the powerlessness becomes unmanageable, thank God I have a program to be able to do something about making the world at least a position where I can move around in it based on my choices. I'm here today because relationship has become super important to me. And the first relationship that I had to embrace that began to make the world better for me was a relationship with change. Beth mentioned, what do we have to change? Everything. And what I was able to understand is that even the smallest change that happens in my life when I'm choosing to make it is changing everything, but it's because it's taking me out of my behavior patterns that, if they're not serving me properly, are in need of change. And most often I wouldn't be able to arrive at that unless I had some input from others. And that's where sponsorship comes into me. So when I got into recovery, I heard from people, listen for your story and get up the courage to ask somebody to sponsor you. And I had that experience rather early. And my gift of desperation was that I finally had to admit my powerlessness over alcohol and drugs, and then the unmanageability, and then ask for help. And when I did that, I actually didn't know until much later that I developed my first primary relationship that was healthy, and that was with my sponsor, Tom Olson, in 1988, in February of 1988. He suggested to me that I take a journey through the steps. And so I embarked on that, and I began to understand that I really had no idea about what was going on in my life at all. I was just plain lost. And that is a direct result of the absence of any mentoring in my family of origin. Everybody was off doing their own thing. Most of the information that came into my life was negativity about my father. I also had the experience of being a really bright kid. And so my mom would elevate me in the eyes of her peers and in the eyes of church people. And if I got things wrong, I'd get beaten pretty severely at home. So I had physical violence in my background. I also had sexual abuse in my background. And many of us in ACA have to endure those kinds of things. And to a small child, they don't make any sense, and why would they? So when I agreed to work steps with my sponsor, I didn't understand that what I was embarking on okay, I understand we're having some trouble with sound, so here I am back live and in person. I didn't understand that what I was embarking on was an ability to be connected to the here and now, to become present. And when I become present, when I'm in the here and now, then I have a lot better chance of saying yes when yes is appropriate, saying no when no is appropriate, learning when I have to put the brakes on, learning when I have to step on the gas pedal. And all of these things were relative to the relationship that I developed with my sponsor and with the steps in the beginning. At about 15 months in recovery, I was feeling about as bad as I was when I first walked in the doors of AA. And I went to my sponsor, and because I had heard so often in my childhood that I was getting it wrong, whatever it was, I was terrified that I would get kicked out of AA, or I would be moved away from the only thing that had been an anchor in my life up to that point. I hadn't found anchoring in my starter marriage. I hadn't found anchoring in deep friendships because when I was drinking and using, all those relationships were based on drinking and using. They weren't based on the love and reality that I found in the program. So he told me, based on what I'd shared with him, that perhaps I had some Al-Anon issues. Why don't I try an Al-Anon meeting? And I looked up a meeting in the directory and found an Al-Anon meeting with ACA focus. I had no idea what that was. But I walked into that room on the 17th of May of 1989, and I heard this man, in essence, tell my story. And that was my point of where my life changed forever. A couple of years later, somebody that I'd been friends with for a while said that they were going to hear Stephanie Brown at Sequoia Hospital in Redwood City. Would I like to go? Well, I said yes. I was trained to say yes to a lot of things in recovery. And I didn't know who Stephanie Brown was, but I figured, why not? There was nothing on my schedule for that morning. And we walked in and I sat down and I saw that same warm, friendly face that you saw when she began her share today. And she talked about personal things and also clinical things, which is my experience when I hear her. So grateful for that. And then she said something that literally made me sit bolt upright in my chair. And that was, in order for us to recover, we had to become abnormal. And abnormal to me was defective, deficient, things that I'd heard about myself for years and years. And she went on to explain that normal behavior for people that are addicted is to be unhealthy and to act out. So in order to get better, we had to do things differently, i.e. to become abnormal. And step work is certainly a part of that. And the journey in recovery at all levels is certainly a part of that. So I'm really glad to say that becoming abnormal is my skin. And my love of recovery and my desire to learn and grow has continued to accelerate over the years, because I really don't want to go back to the abyss that I felt. That I felt before I was able to come into recovery. So that leads me to talk and share about time with Beth. I'll just kick off for about 2 minutes to say that I had decided that the only relationships that I wanted were relationships with the passion that I had always had in my life, something that may have kept me alive, which was my love of sports. And I also have a love of animals, and I have a love of plants. I have a love of life just in general. But as far as relationships were concerned, my success rate had not been very good. And so I opted into just staying single, and I didn't care if I got involved in a relationship again. And that seemed to be okay with me, although I admired people that were able to get into relationship. So I've had season tickets to the San Francisco Giants with 7 other people for many, many years. And I got a call from Barbara, who asked me if I remembered Beth, who had been on a trip that I'm associated with. And I said, sure I do, because I remembered her heart and I remembered her soul. She was connected with somebody at the time, and I was married in a very, very dysfunctional relationship. And what I had recognized about her was she was very kind, and she had a great sense of humor. And so Barbara said, do you happen to have any extra tickets to any upcoming games? Well, I did. So she said, how about if I invite Beth? And I said, sure, that's fine. So we sat together at the baseball game, and I laughed a lot. And she had a passion for sports, and I liked that. And she explained to me that she was going to have some surgery, and Barbara had enlightened me about that already. And she knew that I had a home that had a downstairs that was a mother-in-law unit that I used as a B&B, and also invited friends and guests to come and share. And it turned out that she asked if she could come and hang out. And she did after her surgery was over. And after the third time, I didn't feel comfortable about having her downstairs because I had so much fun talking and interacting with her. And so I invited her to come up, and I cooked for her, and she cooked for me. And we sat down and watched a ball game together, and she yelled and hollered and jumped up off the couch the same way as I do. And I thought, that's very interesting. And then she left, and I'm going to stop here and have her continue.
That's fabulous. I do want to clarify that I was downstairs in the main house too, and Bob was upstairs. Anyway, so we continued to get to know each other. And I remember the first time before we met, I had a dog named Annie, and he would sing to her when we talked on the phone at night. And he would, sing that Annie, Annie for Nanny song. I don't know, it's old, I don't know. And and so when he came up, Annie and I had been, living life for a long time together, and not many boys. And so he got out of the car, and she was just like, look at him, and he started singing, and she was like, oh, it's you. Okay. And she ran out to the car. And that was one of the sweetest things I'd ever seen. And so, as we got to know each other, I think Bob thought we were really good friends, and we were. And so we would go to sleep at night, and he'd be upstairs and I'd be down in the spare bedroom, and I would just cry and cry and cry. And I'm like, why am I crying? I'm like, 'cause I'm supposed to be upstairs, And so anyway, we were watching TV one night, and I turned around and I looked at him, and he's like, what? And I said, you do know I have a crush on you, right? And he's like, and he looked behind himself, and he's like, what? And
I'm gonna water my plants.
What? Oh, okay. Anyway, so, from then on, we had a firm foundation of friendship, and yeah, we found that we had a spark too. And that was a good thing. I can say we're going to be 14 years together in September. And we've been through some stuff together, and when we first got together, we were talking about how in former relationships, one of us would bail. Like there was always a deal breaker, and sometimes I didn't even know what it was going to be, but it was there. And so we pictured this room with a door in the back that we could run out, and I said, well, okay, let's nail the door shut, first of all, and put a couple chairs in the middle of the room and just talk it out, and that has worked, and it's not always comfortable. And I know that I like to think I'm less codependent than I used to be. I don't know, am I? But Barbara got that. But I know that through the years, our personalities and different things have shifted. And, as I get older, I know less. I'm certain of less. I don't know what's going to happen. Especially nowadays, I don't know what's going to happen, but I have a little more peace, and we have both. I've had depression and anxiety that I needed to treat, and Bob can talk about his stuff with, medication and that process. But I know that it keeps getting better because we keep walking through things. And I think as addicts, we want that woo, all the time. And I don't think that that is realistic. I think that the love that I feel for Bob also, besides the woo, is from experiencing life together. And the only way you get that is by sticking together and working through things. And I just don't think there's any deal breakers, and there's nobody that I'd rather do the work with. And there's nobody who has a bigger heart than Bob, and I don't mean enlarged, I mean generosity and kindness and empathy and patience. And he needs all that patience to live with me. So what else? Anything?
Yes, I would just share that I'm astonished that finding someone to love and be loved by and love with is wonderful, whether it occurs when we're young, middle-aged, or old. I have the same kinds of passions, the same kinds of feelings, the same kinds of interest, even sexual energy, and I'm in my 70s. I can feel those feelings because ACA recovery has taught me to strive to be present. And when I'm present, then I'm available. And the first relationship, which was the relationship with change, meant that I wasn't going to be operating in a way that I wasn't available to be present in the here and now. Because I had to have mood altering chemicals to stay focused. Sugar, Barbara mentioned, that was probably my first drug of choice, and so on. And so I'm really happy that we're available for each other. And one of the ways that that transpired was that when we decided we were going to become a couple, we made a conscious decision to go to therapy, to couples counseling. And we weren't even 6 months into the relationship. And we had had discussions that we both knew where we came from, and that we had not been successful in relationships before, and that the modeling that we had for relationships was horrible. There was no good or healthy modeling. So how could we be expected to pick up a book and read something? This is the way it's supposed to be. That just wasn't happening. So when we went into therapy, our therapist asked us to define what our commitment was. What did it look like for us? And when we were able to look at each other and say what that was, it was a foundation. It was a beginning, and it was nothing like I had ever experienced before. And we re-upped that foundation because almost with very few exceptions, we pray together every morning. And we ask for guidance and direction outside of ourselves. And that was a gift that was given to us by a popular recovery speaker who runs workshops on the steps. And he told us about how he and his wife did that. And it sounded like a good idea. So we began to do it. These are examples of things that we learned from you, from people in the program. We've learned today from Stephanie and Tom and Barbara, and I've learned from Beth, and we've learned from the questions that we've heard today here. Relationship is a big, broad-based topic, and someone wrote a very sensitive question early on when Stephanie was sharing about a single man not being on the panel. And what I'd like to say is there is so much about relationships that it wouldn't surprise me if the ACA Healing Fellowship does something on relationships in the future. I would definitely vote for that, because this is only scratching the surface. I just cannot say how coming from a background in life where relationship meant nothing to me except fear, to coming to a position where ACA recovery has given me a love of pursuing relationships is a gift beyond my wildest imagination. I never could have written a script for life than the work that the promises avail us has given. And if I hadn't run into Beth and thanks to Barbara, because I said to her, hey, I heard the darndest thing from Beth. She said she had a crush on me. And Barbara waited a couple of seconds and then she said, well, like, what are you going to do about it? I was that detached from wanting to be involved when my heart sang out with desperation to be involved, because that's what recovery is all about, is connection. That's what it is. Connection is the opposite of addiction. And now I get to be connected to my sweetheart, and I get to be connected to all of you. And I'm very grateful for that. What else, honey?
That's it. We're going to talk about, I mentioned meds. No.
No.
Is that our time?
Pretty much. Yes. Steve, you're on. So thank you so much. I identified so much of what you talked about, and thank you for getting very specific about your ACA recovery and about your, your collective and individual journeys. All right. So we are going to segue into our question and answer time. So for those of you who haven't yet sent Lisa your questions, please do so. We have definitely more time for them to answer them. All right, so question number 1 for Bob. I understand that many of us addicts believe what we think and think what we believe. What is the first step in changing this mentality, which makes change difficult? In other words, any advice on getting out of our head to break this pattern?
What a fantastic question. The way that the steps were written and the design of breaking down powerlessness and denial, I suppose, are worked in a huge variety of ways. And we could go to different workshops and hear one workshop leader present step one way, and another workshop leader present them a different way, or my sponsor presents it different from Catherine's or Beth's or Tom's. So which is right? Yes. When I am powerless and my life is unmanageable, which addiction eventually will bring any of us to. I knew that I had addiction problems at least 10 years before I got here, but I had a relationship with alcohol and drugs. They provided me an ability to do what I couldn't do for myself. And I hadn't gotten to a position yet where I had learned that I could have a power greater than myself. So somewhere along the line, instead of breaking step 1 down, here's the specific answer to your question. I learned a technique in step 1, instead of just saying I'm powerless over and then make the list, and then a second half of the page, same page, here's what I'm powerless over, and here's what's unmanageable. I added a 3rd and 4th column. The 3rd column is about, do I have a choice in the unmanageability? So if I've got gripes with Beth and I'm continuing the argument or perpetuating something, that's a choice. The same way as it would be a choice to detach. So then here came the one that gives me an upset stomach. I added a 4th column which is, what's the payoff for the choice? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Okay, I'm powerless. My life's unmanageable. Oops, I have a choice here. And what's the payoff for my choice? And Stephanie and Barbara and Tom all articulated becoming accountable. And the breaking of any kind of addiction, including emotional addiction for me, is to ask to be more accountable, which means I'm more present. And then by golly, to do something about it, because it requires action.
Thank you. So thank you, people. Continue to email Lisa, our chat monitor, but we have a couple messages, just shout outs. One was, I loved your point about having a firm foundation of friendship. Great message. And then the other one was, yay, hope for relationships. I think this gave people a lot of hope. And then I believe Amy said she just wanted you to know that she grew up in Wilmette, Illinois also. So there you go. There you go.
Logan Elementary School, as it was known in those days, 1514 Central.
And we do have one question. So do you go to the same or separate recovery meetings? Have you ever worked the steps together as a couple? So 2 different questions.
Some meetings together and some separate. I've been taught, you know, I have my program and you have your program, and the way I'm sponsored, you know, I think that's really important. We did go to a couples group for a while, and we have a meeting on Saturdays that we go to together, but definitely we have our own, you know, programs. We haven't, I don't think we've worked steps together. We've looked at the traditions as far as being in a relationship. But yeah.
Yeah, I would say that we're very definitely open to working the steps together. This may sound odd, but I'm powerless over best behavior. I'm oftentimes powerless over my behavior until I figure out I have a choice in what the payoff is. But our lives are pretty manageable because we get right down to the nitty gritty. One thing that I didn't say in my share is that for those of you, and welcome anybody who comes into ACA from different programs. My God, we're glad that we're you and we're all here. But I learned quite a while ago that the most valuable information in the AA Big Book is that we know only a little. And we need to seek the help of outside sources and other people. And I was sober about 4 years, and I'd gotten ensconced in my ACA recovery. And I heard somebody share that the notion that anger was the dubious distinction of normal men was a preposterous statement and completely false. And I listened very closely to what that individual had to say. He's an author and says that anger expressed appropriately equals intimacy, energy, and serenity, and that anger is a secondary emotion. So Beth and I will naturally have anger sometimes. And we put that out on the table because I trust her and she trusts me. It's a very important part of our intimacy, so that our lives continue to become more manageable. If we run into something where lives are not manageable, I think it's safe to say that we would step right up and work the steps on that issue.
Thank you. We're still looking for more questions. How do you negotiate anger and grief during your daily ups and downs of life?
What helps me with anger is that I can feel angry. I need to look at that. And usually if I go deep enough, I'm afraid underneath. Or my anger is at myself sometimes, like I didn't say something I needed to say that was true. Or I said something and I shouldn't have, and now I have to clean it up, you know? I think with each other, it's like we can just, I can have my feelings. My sponsor says, your feelings are like a parade. You can, kind of watch them go by and feel them. And, I don't get horrendously angry anymore in my life, but I can talk about it to Bob and say, really bugs me, whatever. And we'll talk about it. And that doesn't mean that things always, change the way one of us wants, but we just like put it on the table, and I think that's important. And as far as grief, I think there's so many forms. And I think that so many losses that we have, as adult children and just humans, and that it's normal, and it opens up old ones that haven't quite healed. And so we talk about it. And if we need space, we need space. And we cry when we need to, and we know that's okay. So.
One of the best things that happened early in our relationship, which I didn't think was very good at the time, I was an athlete in my youth, and I'm a fairly big guy. And I did not realize how many times I could move people away from me because I was scared by being very boisterous and loud. So Beth surprised me. I think we were either in our first year, maybe in our second year. And she told me that she was moving into her sponsor's house for a week because she was nervous and afraid about my anger. And I went nuts. Everything went right up to the surface. Okay, here we go. Here comes the abandonment. I've blown it again. All sorts of stuff was coming up and percolating in my mind. I need to change me in order for her to be okay, which is never a good idea. So because I had the kind of recovery I had under my belt, I could stop and breathe and see how much of this belongs to me, and is there any part of it that doesn't? And then Beth gave me the gift of saying, I love you. This is not about you. This is about me. Well, nobody's a big word, but not many people want to hear that because it's always about me. So I had to take in what she was actually saying to me. And I noticed a lot of things about that week of separation that we had. The first one was that by the 2-day mark, I missed her so bad that I was actually in physical pain, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that my life and the work that I'd done in my life had gotten me into a position where I could care that much. And really what the steps do is like taking a broom and sweeping off all this dust and dirt and debris that enables us to be who we were meant to be from the very beginning. Innocent children who got shown a raw deal. And then I got to hear why she was afraid when she came back. And then I was challenged to make adjustments. And Beth mentioned medication earlier. I was always pro-medication for all of you folks, because you need it. So be sure you take it if you need it. If it's prescribed, you take it. I don't know whether I thought that if I was diagnosed with something that I was flawed, because all those old tapes would come back. But I did get enough information about ADHD and dyslexia. And these were things that I'd been troubled with my entire life. And I didn't want to take speed. So I had always backed away from Ritalin or those kinds of drugs. And my primary physician, who was over 40 years sober, said, hey, Bob, there's something on the market called Strattera, and it's non-invasive, and we can try you on this and see what happens. And it changed my life. I could, and hers too, she says, I could finally work 3,000 piece puzzles that were my life. I could work them by taking them out of the box and spending eons of time fixing them, but the puzzle that was my life became more manageable after I got on that medication. And thank God for medication. If you need it and it's prescribed and I'm taking it according to the prescription, it can really have a great effect on relationship. So now I have a relationship with my medication too.
Oh my goodness. So now we've got one more question. Can't do it too long. So how did you go from communicating as toddlers or angry teenagers to healthy adults?
Time, a good therapist, and practice and willingness, and being able to see our behavior and go, whoop, that isn't how I want to treat this person. Or when I'm in the moment, I'm having a big emotional thing. It's usually about something old. And sometimes I don't have words for how I'm feeling because I was that little. I probably didn't have words for that feeling. So I go back to when was the first time I felt like this, and it's just like practice. I don't always see it immediately.
Who asked that question? You don't have to answer that, Catherine, but here's a hug and lots of love out to you. My sponsor has diligently moved me from moving to take care of my inner child to taking care of my adolescent to taking care of my young adult and moving on into adulthood. When I am seen to have been making progress, I get a push, and I need that push. If I could figure this stuff out on my own, I would. But I have found that because I'm working more with my grandparenting, if you will, my young adult and my adult now, my inner child pretty much knows that he is taken care of. My adolescent knows he's taken care of because I have been encouraged to move into that next dimension. And to me, that's where ACA recovery in the future is headed. It's the hope that those things that triggered me and bothered me early on and caused me to have behaviors even years into recovery that were not self-sustaining or helpful can be overcome. And that's where the step work and connection comes in with sponsorship and with sharing what's really going on with me as often as I can with my intimates and my friends in recovery.
Right. And that's pretty much it. Just one last, you both still enjoy going to see the Giants play baseball together still?
Yeah.
All righty. Well, thank you so much. We apologize if we didn't get your questions still. We won't have time, but you're welcome to contact. We have an ACA Healing Fellowship phone list. And if you heard something today, you're welcome to contact people. Our announcements are, there you go. Every ACA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. For your 7th tradition, please use the PayPal, your own PayPal, to send your donation to acahealing@gmail.com. The audio recording of today's workshop will be posted to our ACA Healing Fellowship YouTube channel, and you can see it on the thing right there. The ACA Healing Fellowship has these meetings all using today's Zoom ID, no password. Wednesday men's meeting, 11:30 PST, Freedom or PDT now. Freedom Friday, 12 PDT, and Serenity Sunday, 4 PDT, Pacific Daylight Time. And also join us on our ACA Healing Fellowship Facebook page. Do we have that? I guess you just go to your Facebook, type in ACA Healing Fellowship, and I believe you asked to be let in. It's a private group. and or a page that you can get information from. Alrighty. Servants for today's workshop, our coordinator, Jules, we're going to have you wave. And there you go. I'm your MC. We have your Zoom hosts. Thank you. Abby and Kim, wave. Our chat monitor, Lisa. Our timekeeper, Anne. And Steve just left, but Steve was our IT extraordinaire. Speaker coordinator was Bob. And we're going to thank our lovely speakers, Stephanie B., Barbara B., Tom G., Beth D., and Bob K. Alrighty then. So I think I will ask, there you go, loving parent meditation. Bob, how would you like to read our loving parent meditation on page 330 of the Big Red Book? You want to unmute yourself? And you're all welcome to unmute.
Okay, let's have a moment of silence and connection with one another. Higher power, help me be willing
To recognize the loving parent inside of me. Help me integrate the inner child more actively into my daily life so that I may remain awake spiritually.
Grant me the courage to change the things
Grant
I
me the
can.
courage to change the
Grant me
things
the
I
wisdom
can.
of my inner child.
Grant me the wisdom of my inner child.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We're happy. Be sure to go to our ACA Healing Fellowship meetings if you'd like, and to go online to our ACA YouTube channel if you'd like to hear this again.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Catherine.
Catherine. Thank you, Bob and Beth.
Thank you. Where can we
Thanks,
get the phone
everybody.
number?
This was
The
great.
phone list? Where can we get
Thanks,
the phone
everybody.
number?
Great job.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What wonderful role models.
Where can we get the phone list?
You can email acahealing@gmail.com
Okay, thank you.
for any questions, comments, or to be added to our phone list, including whether or not you want to be added as a sponsor or a fellow traveler, which we're always looking for.
And is there a link to the Facebook group page? How do you find that?
Abby, do we have that?
No link, just search ACA Fellowship in the search bar and it will come up.
Loving.
Okay.
Sorry, search what? Search ACA.
Yeah, acahealing@gmail.com is we've streamlined. One of the great things about the fellowship is they've streamlined these processes to the point where if you just know acahealing@gmail.com, and if you know the idea, you can access pretty much anything or get to the person that can get you that way. So
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go.
Beth, I wanted to ask you a question. You had said, this is Jackie, grateful member of ACA. I wanted to know what you said about, what was it? Clean and sober love requires what? What was that, the changing everything? Is that what you said?
Oh, that probably was what I said. I would just say it's totally different than being awake while you're working on your relationship and dating, all that stuff. It's like, I think it's kind of like being a kid again for me. I kind of like, I'm starting to walk and I fall down and I get up, and it just feels like all new, and some of the anxiety stuff that I didn't feel when I was drinking and using, I would feel, it's just different awake. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
It's like Catherine had a question.
Oh, I have a question for Beth. Are you available to sponsor?
I can put my phone number in and we can talk about it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. That's Catherine. This Catherine? Okay.
You guys are like the Bigfoot, like a healthy relationship couple, like the mythical creature. This is amazing to me.
Need to chat.
You just double click on her.
Okay. Sorry, it's more technical than I am.
Is it okay if I just say something? I know we're closing here, but I'm new, and
So I just need to interrupt you for a second because we're still being recorded. We're just letting you know.
Okay, thanks for okay. I'm new, and when I hear you say, thank you, all of you speakers and everybody, I hear you say that you're parenting your inner child and then the, toddler and the adolescent and young adult. It just sounds like impossible to me. Like I just can't. I'm so excited to try it and I'm open to it. But how long did it take you to get to the point of realizing that there was somebody in there that you could address?
We'll open up to the speakers.
Yeah, I think whatever it is that brings us to recovery, that pain or whatever it is the first step in acknowledging an unmet little person. Or sometimes when I have feelings, they feel like they're from a little person, or the vulnerability I feel. I'm 58 years old, but I feel sick. Something's going on, and I just in my recovery, I learned from the people, from the meetings I'm in and the women that I talk to. And I don't think any of us get here on a really happy day. Usually we have something that's made us look inside a little more, and there's lots of people doing that. So, yeah.
Yeah. But did you all feel like that was kind of not impossible, but that was going to be a tall order in the beginning?
Pretty daunting. Yeah, it can be pretty daunting.
I think that in no small measure, sponsorship is really important to me, because that gave me a guidepost where I actually was in relationship with someone that I had a choice to be able to trust. And the gift of desperation that I mentioned meant that I really didn't have anywhere else to go.
Yeah.
Other places where I had tried to go did not bring any kind of relief. So I placed my faith and trust in a sponsor. And the first thing that he said to me was that he was going to guide me through the steps, which would help solve my living problem. You mentioned alcohol or drugs or anything else. He said it was going to help solve my living problem. Well, I knew darn good and well I had a living problem. And when I agreed to make that commitment, it was like asking a question. And I might submit to you, Shannon, that by virtue of the fact that you asked the question you did, that you're probably well on your way. So just take the broom out and keep sweeping and sweeping. And all of a sudden, one light comes on, a different light comes on. That's what the layers of the onion are all about, as it has been explained to me. Catherine asked for best information, but we can't click on Catherine.
Unless you're on video. It doesn't show her in the person.
It's because the chat is locked.
Because the chat's locked.
Okay.
I just opened it, so you can put it in now. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That's okay.
It's right there.
No worries.
Might I chime in on that question?
Yes.
This is Allison. Shannon, I don't know if you have ACA literature, but if you have what we refer to as the big red book, the basic text, chapter 8 is is
have that.
called Becoming Your Own Loving Parent, and it has some exercises and some ideas about, you know, contacting and identifying your inner child. And then the other thing that has helped me greatly is I'm working with the therapist. We do EMDR, which is looking at childhood trauma. And she has been helpful in helping me identify the inner children. I've got 7 of them from infant to age 18. And the reason there are so many is they each carry their, you know, each are identified with some particular trauma. But, you know, start small, start with 1. And that chapter 8 will be a good, an excellent place to start to get ideas about how to go about that.
Great, thank you. It just sounds like so magical. Really.
It really is. It's wonderful healing work.
Thank you.
We just add that you don't need to figure anything out yet, and that the process of going to meetings and listening to people who have what you want and asking them with how they did it, and perhaps one time at some point in the future asking them to help you, that will be a big step in taking care of a lot of this process.
As you go along, it will probably unfold in a pretty organic fashion.
Yeah.
Catherine, are you still raising your hand, or do you just need to lower your hand?
I lowered my hand. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you all for your service. This was really, really, really great.
Oh, it was fun.
Awesome.
So we will be having another probably event. We usually have about 2 a year. Original goal was 3, but so if you were all on our mailing list, I don't know how you got a hold. Some of you I contacted the intergroups. Bob, different people had different contacts. If you'd like to be contacted about future events, again, you can always email acahealing@gmail.com. And we can place you on that phone list, or you can just let us know you'd like to be informed. So we do have a question. Does anyone have topics you would want to see next time for the next event? And you can always place that in the chat, or you can always email also acahealing@gmail.com. Like I said, we got kind of a system here, so it works pretty well.
Thanks for helping us organize this, Jules. You rock. Rocking all relationships.
Thanks, everybody. Have a fantastic rest of your evening.
All right, we're glad you're here. Thanks,
Catherine, you did a terrific job as MC. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We're gonna say goodbye, and can't wait to see everybody again. And I can't wait to see some of you in person at Waller Park on August 6th.
See you there.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, Bob. I'm looking forward to meeting you in person at Waller.
Likewise, me, you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Grateful everybody came.
Are we ready to end the recording? Yeah, I'm just going to ask, how are we doing? Let's do it.
Yeah, does everybody?
All right.